Game of Thrones, the scheming Baratheon. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction. So please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter. And if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 176, Defeating Jaime and Slapping Cersei. He was probably trying to show off in front of Edward to make him pay more as a reward for this show. Even the 11-year-old, Teresa, who had it a little challenging, facing grown-up men, participated to know how she fared in front of those men with Carena behind her. What Edward did not see, though, was Cersei looking at someone on Edward's side and shaking her head as a signal. Even the almighty Edward did not notice what she did, but his son Raymond did. Although Raymond discerned Cersei's actions, he did not know who she was sending this signal to, and he had to investigate. He could not believe that his father would make such a sloppy mistake, for it did not take long before Ned Stark and his 500 men arrived at the scene. But when they came, they only saw corpses and shreds around the area, a hand or a leg here and there. Not even one of Edward's men got hurt in this small battle, while the 200 soldiers, following Robert and Cersei, were torn into pieces. After seeing this situation, even the collected Ned's face changed. This scene reminded him of the former things that the old Edward did in the past during the rebellion. Although Edward did not kill normal people this time, he killed 200 men in Ned's home. Ned could not believe that Edward would do that here in Winterfell. Joffrey Baratheon, who was in his mother's hands all this time, could not help but throw up after seeing this scene while looking at Edward as if he was his idol. Joffrey was a sadist bastard that loved nothing more than torturing people here and there. He had heard a lot about his uncle and what he did in the past, and he admired him more than his father, the brutal Robert. He tried to get close to Edward and visit him, but he did not know why Edward hated him and his mother. "Are you going to stand there like that, Lord Stark? Are not you going to defend your queen against this brutal?" said Cersei with her usual cold tone as she looked at Ned Stark, who stood there without doing anything while her men died like ants in front of Edward. Although Robert was not there, as he must be fucking a whore somewhere in Winterfell, Ned did not expect this situation. After hearing her words, Edward could not help but smirk at Cersei's behavior. He decided to play with her a little and moved a little by little towards Cersei and her family. Seeing this, Ned tried to stop Edward, since he knew that Edward hated the Lannisters and Robert more than he hated anything else, and he was sure that Edward would do something irrational. But before he could get close, Raymond and John Clyn stood in front of Ned to stop him from doing anything. They knew that when Edward got angered for any reason, he would hurt anyone in front of him, and they did not want to see Ned as one of those. Edward moved slowly, and Cersei, who was faking her bravery since the start, started trembling in fear as she saw that even Ned Stark could not do anything in his own castle. Her rage had helped her since the beginning, but when she saw what happened and how Edward was coming close, her fear started to show up, not only her but her son as well. The two little children in the back cried as well after they saw Edward coming towards them. Jaime, who had some self-confidence and thought that he could stand against Edward after 15 years of not seeing each other, tried to act a hero in front of his sister. No one could deny that he got better since Edward last saw him. But what could he do? Jaime was not the only one who trained himself. He was probably hoping to fuck his sister again that night if he managed to kill Edward. Edward did not despise any Lannister except Jaime. Although he was a great swordsman and knight, he was a scumbag in Edward's eyes who wasted the Lannisters' legacy. He did not deserve to fuck Cersei at all. Edward should be the one to do that. Anyway, when Edward saw this scene, he could not help but laugh out loud, since that idiot Jaime did not understand the difference between them. Well, Edward did not mind teaching him a new lesson this time as well. "Oh, the King's Lair. Trying to act brave the same way he did back then. I will give you another chance, but once you fail like always, you will lose a hand and a dick," said Edward with a smile on his face as he looked at Jaime's lower parts with a creepy "Geez. We will see. I will return the humiliation from back then," said Jaime as he used his sword to attack Edward before he could take out his as well. He wanted nothing more than punishing Edward for what he did 15 years ago. Not only did Edward humiliate him, but he also injured his father and left him on the ground, not being able to do anything. Edward's smile did not leave his face at all the time, even after seeing Jaime's action. Edward only dodged Jaime's hit by taking one step back. He started mocking him at once after that. Haha, you want me to defeat you with no sword like back then? Well, I don't see why not, said Edward, as he continued to avoid Jaime's attacks one after another while making Jaime look like a fool who did not even manage to land a hit. Stay still and fight, you coward, said Cersei with a loud voice when she thought her brother had the upper hand, but Edward had a different opinion after hearing those words. Before Jaime could attack him again, Edward held his fist that was carrying the sword and prevented Jaime from switching the sword to his other hand. The Lannisters' strength could not hold up to the Baratheons, especially to someone like Edward. Edward used his knee to hit Jaime in the balls without hesitation before using his head to attack Jaime's. Cersei, who saw this scene, screamed from horror at once, tried to attack Edward and save Jaime with a dagger that she hid in God nowhere. Edward smirked at her foolishness and used the back of his hand to slap her face hard, making her fly back a few meters. At this time, Cersei was not the greatest bitch in Westeros. She still had a lot to go through before she became our favorite bitch. To create such a bitch, years of humiliation were required for turning a bitch into a great one. 4. Chapter 177, Cutting a Hand. Now, Kingslayer. Which hand you don't need anymore, said Edward with a creepy smile on his face as he looked at the fallen Lannister. But before Jaime could reply, two men arrived at the scene. Robert, who was drinking in the morning and fucking a whore even after knowing what happened to his friend's son, finally showed up his face at this moment. The other one was Tyrion Lannister, who was also drinking after talking with Edward and arrived to see his family in this situation. Stop this shit, Edward, right now, shouted Robert, who was still drunk, as he came close shouting at Edward. Before he could come close, though, Edward's men stopped him as if he meant nothing in front of their eyes. Robert became angry at once after seeing this scene. He was about to use force to fight those men, but before he could, Edward showed up by himself in front of Robert's eyes. What will you do if I don't? Huh? What will you do? It seems that you forget who is Edward and what he is capable of because I did not hit you enough in the past decade, said Edward before punching Robert's face at once, making him fall to the ground like a pig with that fat body of his. Before Robert could wake up from his daze, Edward stomped on his injured hand that was still hurting Robert, even after 15 years. Shouted Robert as the pain was intolerable to him. This pain was one of the many reasons that made him hate Edward from that time, but Edward did not care about Robert's feelings in the first place. Don't think much of yourself. I am the one who put that crown on your head, and I am also the one that could take it back if I wanted that, said Edward with a smile after slapping Robert's fat face. At this point, Ned, who had been trying to get rid of the group holding him back, managed to do that at this time and stood between Edward and Robert before Edward could attack Robert anymore. Stop it, Edward. Right now, said Ned with a loud voice as he looked at Edward since Edward had caused many problems at this point. I heard that you are going back with him. You still did not listen to me, said Edward with a sigh as he did not expect that Ned would still go back after advising him many times against it. Of course, all that was a fake act. Edward wanted Ned to go so that he could control the North a little by little. Ned did not reply to Edward's question because Edward had warned him many times, but he did not listen in the end. Whatever, do what you want, but I pay my debts as well, said Edward as he turned to Jaime, who was still on the ground before taking out his sword and cutting his left hand, the one that he did not use much. Screamed Jaime as he cried in pain. Even Tyrion Lannister could not believe his eyes at this moment. He thought that with the existence of Robert and Ned Stark, everything was over for his brother. But Edward returned and took Jaime's left hand like that too. As for the bitch, Cersei, who saw this scene, could not help but look at Edward as if she wanted to eat him alive and pay him back. Edward decided to intensify her fears by threatening her. Look at me like that, again, and I will take out those eyes and make them a good decoration, said Edward with a cruel smile, waiting for Tywin to listen to what he did hear. He wanted to know what that fox would do at that point. Edward then got close to her and said a few words that made her tremble in fear, getting everyone confused since she did not even budge after everything that Edward did until this moment. What possibly could he say to make this bitch fearful like that? We are leaving today. I am taking Jon and Arya with me. I will see Bran before going, said Edward with a calm voice while looking at Ned as if he did not do anything worth mentioning. He spoke normally as if he was not the reason for everything that happened here. After cutting down Jaime's hand, threatening Cersei, And saying those final words to Ned, Edward picked up the fallen hand that he just cut and threw it into the fire, ending any possible hope for Jaime and the Lannister to use it back and attach it to Jaime. At this time, Cersei did not have the Mad Maester Qyburn to help Jaime in coming up with a solution for this. She would never manage to recruit him in this world because Edward would leave such a talented man to go to serve such a useless king for. In fact, Edward had already managed to recruit that crazy bastard after he got kicked out of the Citadel. He also got stripped of his chain by the Archmaesters for engaging in forbidden human experimentation. Although the man's experiments were a little crazy and made people feel disgusting, Edward could go with that as long as he could have some results. Edward had the same thoughts as Qyburn, who impressed Edward again and again. How could Edward say no to someone who managed to develop a disease that Edward was going to use against Braavos? The man was talented enough to think of making such a disease that could end the whole realm, so Edward would support him, of course. Although Qyburn killed hundreds of people before he managed to create this fatal disease, Edward still supported the madman and provided everything he needed. He was the one who provided people for him to use for his experiments actually. Well, this world had nothing like human rights or something that would stop Edward from doing something like that. This world followed the jungle laws where the strong ate the weak without even thinking for a second. Edward had already done some things that were even worse than this and planned to do more, so how could he care about such sacrifices? When Edward thought of kidnapping some people for Qyburn, Edward had many places to choose from for these experiments. Of course, he would not take people from his lands since he had other locations to provide him with supplies. In the end, King's Landing was the perfect place where Edward could take all those men without much notice. It was close to his lands and had many people that some hundreds would go unnoticed. Edward named that disease Green Onion, after seeing the final result with his own eyes because of its characteristics. 1. Chapter 178, Green Onion. This disease got created from the combination of different uncurable ones in this world. Edward did not hear about those diseases in his past life, which meant those things were the results of magic or curses. It could take only one day before annihilating a whole city. It first turned the skin into a green color. After that, it started absorbing all the nutrients inside the boy. The body started smelling like onion after 3 days of the person's death. The fatal danger came from the duration this thing needed for a process like that and how it could spread. It would only take 12 minutes before absorbing the body's nutrients, making the person lose his life a few minutes after that happened. After that, the dead body became a carrier and would release the virus in the air, making anyone near it die as well. That was why it was the most fatal thing that Edward witnessed in this world. The best thing, which made it convenient in Edward's eyes, was that the virus or the carrier would die after only one day, and it would dissolve in water, which meant that it could not spread through water. The smell of the onion indicated that everything was fine and that the virus died as well. So as long as no one managed to escape from the place for a day, the disease would die. That was why Edward decided to use it against Braavos. With his fleets surrounding the city from all directions for years, sinking every ship that came out or in, he could send someone he did not like with a disease and kill him with the city. It sounded cruel to kill tens of thousands like that, but Edward did not care. He had already had enough with those annoying bastards and Braavos, so he decided to end them all without leaving anyone alive. He thought of doing the same in Pentos but changed his mind. Pentos and its magisters were just a weak fools without any support, and he preferred to have their heads himself. He would change the city to no master and no noble one. Although Edward killed the masters and nobles of the other cities, he did not change the system running those cities since his men took those positions. Plus, he wanted his men to take care of those cities for him since he did not have the ability to manage all this empire with his own hands. Edward would send his sons and commanders to govern a whole area, though. By doing that and rotating the nobles and commanders, he would manage to test their loyalty. But his plan for Pentos would be something different. Since Pentos was the nearest city to his capital, Storm's Eye, Edward planned to appoint one of his sons to rule the city. Anyway, after Edward left the scene that would remain as a stain on Winterfell's face, he walked towards the Great Keep, intending to see Bran, who would become the Three-Eyed Raven soon, before leaving. As for the others in the scene, their expressions changed after Edward left. The shocked and fearful faces were everywhere, and everyone remembered the tales that their nanas told them when they were young about the fearful Storm King. Although they thought that those things were just myths because they did not witness it and how Edward treated everyone after the rebellion, the legend proved that it was the truth on this day. Robert, who was still on the ground, was looking at the sky, not knowing what to do anymore. What Edward's action of torturing him and slapping his wife like that meant was not just a slap on his face as a king, but as a man as well. He thought that after he became the king of the Six Kingdoms, he would surpass his brother that had weighed on his heart for God know how long, but nothing changed after all those years. He was still nothing in front of his brother, who could step on his face like that without caring. He had listened to the Lannisters before and threatened Edward with an army to try to get the lands of Crown Lands after 3 years of taking the throne. He thought that with a Lannister and the other kingdoms behind his back, Robert would not need to fear his brother anymore. But looking at this scene right now and at what happened after he threatened Edward, Robert felt depressed since he would never have the ability to defeat his brother in this life. He could not do that 15 years ago, and he surely could not do that now as well. It seemed that because of Edward, Robert would die earlier than what happened in the canon. As for Ned Stark, he stood there without knowing what to do or say anymore. What could he say to console Robert and the other Lannisters after what happened in his castle on Edward's hands? Although he was a little upset that Edward did not respect him and did something like that in Winterfell, making him lose some of his face and honor, he would not just cut his relationship with Edward after he did that. Edward was much more closer to Ned than the current Robert, who had betrayed Ned's trust put on him more than one time. Plus, Ned was sure that Edward did something like that for a reason. Since Edward did not go this wild for nearly a decade, Ned was sure that the Lannister was behind all this. And Ned could swear that with that woman's poisonous mouth, she was the one behind what happened here. Ned could only ask for some soldiers to take Jaime to Mr. Lewin in order to treat Jaime's hand. If Ned did not do that, Jaime would probably die from blood loss after his hand got cut like that. He himself went to check on Robert without paying any attention to the dead soldiers. "How are you doing, Robert?" asked Ned after he saw the absent looking on his childhood friend's face. Although he was mad at Robert and did not take him as his dear friend from the past anymore, he still considered him his king. Ned Stark would never break an oath, and he swore one to Robert, so he was going to uphold that oath. He was going to hold his word and honor to the bitter end. That was Ned's problem in Edward's eyes. Although Ned could be a loyal friend, who could serve Edward without any kind of betrayal, Edward was sure that Ned would never break his oath. He would always side with Robert. That was a sin in Edward's eyes. Chapter 179, Cersei is angry. Don't give me that crap about if he betrayed Robert, Ned could betray Edward as well. Edward ruled like a tyrant with his strength on one side and benefits on the other. If the benefits were not great, even the most loyal person would betray you in the end. That was where the strength was required. Although Edward knew that was not applicable to Ned Stark, he did not care. "What do you think?" "Beaten like a pig," said Robert, with a loud voice. Everyone could see that there were some mockery, anger, and helplessness in his voice. He had completely given up at this moment and would like to return to King's Landing at once. Before Ned Stark could speak and console the man, a voice came from the back, mocking both of them, making them angry again. Yes, as everyone had already guessed. The woman, who got humiliated like never before in her entire life, finally spoke with her poisonous tongue. "That is all you gonna say after he beat you like that, slapped your woman, and cut her brother's arm? And you, Lord Stark, I want to know where your loyalty and honor were when you saw that brutal man attacking your king and queen like that," said Cersei while looking at both the men with hate and hostility, since she blamed both of them for not defending her well and allowing her brother to lose an arm. She wanted to rip them both the same way she wished to do to Edward. When she remembered what Edward told her before he left, though, her face paled again since Edward's words meant that he knew everything. From the start to the end, nothing got hidden from him. He mocked her by asking her to take care of her children because their father had just lost a hand, which indicated that he knew about everything happening between her and Jaime. She wondered why he did not tell Robert all this time after knowing about those facts, but she figured that he did not care about her or Robert since he had the strength to kill both of them. The second thing that he told her was a threat, in fact. He warned her not to visit the boy that she almost killed again or else he would kill her with his own hands. Edward hated Cersei for this. Although he was cruel and did not mind killing thousands, he would admit what he did without any fear. Although Edward, himself, did not admit what he did to Renly and Brandon back then, he did not go consoling their families. He only used their deaths to his advantage. Edward was a little hypocrite for thinking like that. As if using the two men's deaths to his advantage was not bad enough. "Shut the hell up, woman," said Robert, who just sat up and heard those words. His face turned red from anger and humiliation, though. Although he had given up on defeating his brother, it did not mean that he forgot what happened. Edward had humiliated him and his wife, making Robert lose his face. Do you think that my 500 men in the castle are enough to stop Edward's men for a second from killing you all? Without calling everyone in the north, you can dream of taking down Edward and his 200 men. I am not going to sacrifice my men for your mistakes. You are the one who started the whole thing, and you should hold up to them," said Ned, with a stern voice. In the canon, he would speak politely in front of Cersei since she was the queen and all, but knowing that she was the reason for what happened here, Ned Stark did not mind his tone and spoke harshly without caring about their positions. "Percy's," said Cersei before she stood up and took his children with her inside the guest house. She did not forget to look hatefully at her younger brother, Tyrion, who stood like a fool since the start in his place without even saying a word to defend the only one who cared about him. Joffrey, who was in her hands, trembled from fear after witnessing what happened. He saw how his uncle Edward and his men killed all their men and cut his uncle Jaime's hand just like that. He wanted to become someone like his uncle so that he could kill and torture everyone he wanted. As for Cersei, her mind got still occupied with her brother and lover, whom Edward kicked hard in his lower parts. She was afraid of two things at the moment. The first was Edward and things he knew which could destroy her and her family entirely. The other thing that made her tremble like that was her brother and his condition. She did not know if her brother would have the ability to fuck her or not after what happened to him outside of the guest house. Although Robert did not say a word, Ned could guess. If he had been in Robert's place, he would feel enough humiliation to make him suicide. But Robert should be resilient to this since Robert grew up with Edward and got suppressed more than just one time. He looked at his king, which was what he considered Robert at the moment, and asked him what he wanted to do. "What do you want to do now, Robert?" asked Ned as he looked at Robert with worry in his eyes. Although he quite hated Robert after everything happened, he did not want his friend Edward to kill his brother with his own hands. Robert looked at Ned after hearing his question and thought for a moment. Robert, the idiot, did not know that Ned did not consider him a friend long ago. Ned was only performing his duty in front of his king. If it had not been only for Jon Arryn, who might have gotten killed by the Lannister, Ned would have listened to Edward and stayed in Winterfell. He started to regret walking the path of dishonor. If he had chosen the same concept that Edward talked about back in the Eyrie, he would have stayed here with his family since they would be the most important thing in his life. What else? Let's finish things here at that. We ride back to King's Landing today, said Robert, with a red face. He already heard the people saying that he was the usurper and the unworthy because he took the throne from the Targaryens and his brother was much better than him. Chapter 180, Final Moments in the North. After hearing his words, Ned Stark could finally sigh in relief. He knew that the things would not end here with this woman glaring at him and Robert like that, but the problem would move out from Winterfell at least. After Edward did what he wanted to do with the Lannisters and his brother, Robert, and humiliated them like that, he decided to see Bran Stark before leaving Winterfell. He had to give Jon and Arya the chance to say goodbye to everyone. So Edward did not forget to take Jon and Arya with him since he knew that Catelyn fucking Stark would use this chance to humiliate Jon more if the boy was there on his own. At least, Jon could say whatever he wanted to Bran without worrying about getting interrupted by Catelyn, who would insult him at every chance. After arriving at the Great Keep and climbing the stairs up to Bran's room, Edward knocked on the door before entering. This keep wasn't his, after all, so he had to act a little polite here. After entering, Edward could see the crying Catelyn sitting on a chair beside Bran's bed and praying for the Seven for her son's recovery. "Lady Stark," said Edward as he looked at the woman and nodded his head. Although he did not like her, he should behave like this, at least. "Your Grace," said Catelyn Stark as she stood up and was about to give her courtesy to Edward, but he decided to stop her since he did not like to force a mother in front of her children. "Don't worry about all that. We are just here to say our farewell to little Bran before leaving," said Edward as he moved closer to Brandon Stark before putting his hands on the boy's shoulders. "I am sorry to see you in this state, little Bran. I know that you will wake up soon, and you will have a great future waiting for you then," said Edward when he remembered what happened in the original timeline when Bran woke up after Catelyn left Winterfell. After that, Bran would travel with House Reed's children to find the three-eyed raven. After saying those words to the little guy, Edward waved his hand to Jon and Arya, waiting since the start a little far from the bed. Catelyn, who saw Jon enter the room with Edward and come close to her son, had been glaring at the innocent boy. She was probably cursing him, as well, and wishing that it was Jon Snow who fell from the tower and not her son. After the two saw Edward's signal, Jon came first and started saying all those things he wanted to say to Bran. Everything happened exactly like the show without Catelyn Stark interference this time. After seeing this scene, Edward thanked God that he made the right decision by leaving Jon to Ned so that he could take care of him, or else Edward was sure that the boy would turn corrupted if he was the one who took care of him. After Jon finished what he wanted to say, Arya came forward to pay her farewell to Bran as well, since she did not know when she would get to see him again. During all this time, Catelyn's eyes did not leave Jon, even ignoring her half-dead son. Edward wanted to ask her what Jon did to her to make her hate him to this degree. But in the end, he decided not to ask this crazy woman because he did not want to upset himself. Although Edward was cruel when it came to his children's benefits, he would not go and bully a little child. If he saw that he was dangerous, killing that boy would be merciful for both sides. But would Catelyn Stark dare to do something like that? Well, Lady Stark, we will take our leave, then, said Edward as he nodded his head to the woman. This time would be the last time that he got to see the woman before she died probably. Edward took Jon and Arya with him before leaving the room. He did not want that woman to say some poisonous words to Jon, upsetting him before they could even march back. When he got down, Edward could see his children and men waiting for him. I think you have enjoyed your time in the north this time, said Edward with a smile as he looked at his youngest daughter Jasmine, who continued to smile since they returned to Winterfell, before turning his head towards the rest of his children. Yet, it was quite fun, said Raymond as he looked at his father. He did not expect that their visit to the north this time would be amusing like that. Raymond was the eldest son, so he was the one that visited the north most with his father. And he was conscious enough to remember all his travels to this cold land. This time, they experienced many exciting events, unlike the other visits when they were just routines where Edward accompanied the criminals to the wall and spent some time with Ned Stark and his family. He might go out of the norm and visit the houses in the north on the way. He remembered every time he came to the north would be a little boring. There was nothing in Winterfell which attracted him really and made him want to come back. Maybe, the wilding and what was happening beyond the wall were interesting, but that was it. Only one time was enjoyable to Raymond when he got to visit Winterfell. It was when Raymond tried to frighten the 7-year-young Robb Stark. He pretended to be angry at that time and carried an axe before chasing after Robb, scaring him by saying that he would cut his dick with this axe. It was funny because Robb pissed himself after he did that one. Although it was a little childish, Raymond, who lived most of his life following his father's steps until that moment, got to enjoy his life for a bit. Robb Stark did not think like that, though, and he tried to stay away from Raymond from that moment and never dared to fight Raymond again. The young Robb would tremble from fear whenever he remembered what happened. Axel, who did not put this visit to the north in his mind from the start, or consider anything else really, did not open his mouth. He just stayed silent like always. Edward wanted to punch him in the face or use a knife to make him laugh and smile all the time, like Joker after getting no response from his son 7. Chapter 181, Jon Snow and Ygritte. Yet, the most interesting thing was when Teresa beat the shit out of Will.i.am and humiliated him in front of everyone, said Lionel with a smile as he looked at Teresa and Will.i.am after saying that. He liked nothing more than macing around and making the others fall out with each other. Yet, it was a great show, especially Will.i.am's face in the end. He looked exactly like a pig, said Orys with a mocking smile while looking at Will.i.am as well. The two brothers were behaving like always. They did not even mention what happened earlier when they killed more than 200 me, or when Edward cut Jaime's hand, as if it was nothing. Well, of course. Will.i.am can only dream of defeating me, said Teresa with a proud smile as she puffed her chest while mocking Will.i.am as well. Will.i.am, who did not know what he did in his life to deserve all this, just turned his head away and did not want to face his siblings since he did not expect that everyone would support Teresa with no one on his side. Jasmine, who enjoyed her time in Edward's hands after seeing her siblings acting like that, came close to Will.i.am and consoled him. "Don't worry, Will," said Jasmine as she consoled Will.i.am, who looked at her as if she was the most amazing person in this world. But before he could thank her, Jasmine's following words ended up all his hopes and destroyed his dreams. "You should have never challenged Teresa in the first place, though," said Jasmine with an innocent smile, making everyone laugh at the difference between her expression and Will.i.am's. "Anyway, let's go," said Edward as he led everyone to travel to White Harbor, where they would take their ship back to Storm's Eye. It was a long journey to the north, and the exciting events would start very soon. Edward had planned for some events to enjoy his time while watching the show. He did not kill Aegon Targaryen yet and decided how to use him well to replace Stannis in the Five Kings War. It would get named the War of Four Kings and a fool, after that idiot participated. Edward even planned to give him Dragonstone for some time so he could attack King's Landing. Although Stannis might get angry at him for doing that, Edward was sure that he could appease Stannis by sending him to rule Volantis or any free city that he wanted for the time being. On their way out, they still could see the aftermath of their battle earlier. The servants in Winterfell were trying to clean up the shreds and corpses around the area with disgusted expressions. Even seasoned warriors would feel like throwing up after seeing this scene. Before they could leave the gate, Ned came to say his farewell as well, since they would not get to see each other for 4 years or something like that in Ned's eyes. He did not know that this would be the last time he would get to see Edward and his family. "Take care of these two, Edward," said Ned as he hugged his daughter, since he would not see her for some time. He did the same to Jon. Although Ned let his wife torture Jon like that, he still considered the boy his son because he was the one who took care of him all this time. Edward looked at Ned for a while so that he could remember his friend's face in the future. This time was their final farewell. "Don't worry about them. One is my son while the other is my daughter," said Edward with a smile as he looked at Ned, getting another smile since Ned knew well enough that Edward would not go back on his words. Plus, he also saw how Edward treated Jon and Arya, and he was sure that no one could harm them in his hands. "Take care, Ned," said Edward before kicking his horse, followed by the others. Brienne was the one who took care of Arya and let her ride with her on her horse. Ned stood there to look at Edward's back as he traveled with his men. He did not know why, but Edward was upset and a little sad after saying those final words. At that time, Ned remembered what Edward told him before about some storm that would happen in the realm and got some bad feelings. He decided to be careful in this journey to the capital, but he would not know that he would die anyway. What could Ned Stark do in King's Landing with nearly 20 to 50 soldiers? He was in the Lannisters' gathering ground, so he would end up dying there unless he took every man in the north with him south. Edward, who left Winterfell, met Ygritte on his way to White Harbor, and they marched together. He decided to let Jon Snow start his relationship with Ygritte since he always liked those two's love in the show. So he called for Jon to introduce him to Ygritte. "To come here, Jon," said Edward as he looked at Jon at the back, who continued looking at Ygritte since she met them on the road. Jon only snapped out of his daze after hearing Edward's words, and the others could not help but smile after seeing his reactions. "Yes," said Jon, who got close to Edward, and Ygritte, who rode beside Edward and could see her this close. "This is my adopted daughter, Ygritte. Ygritte, this is Jon. He will be my foster son as well," said Edward as he introduced the two. Before Jon could even say hi to the girl, she looked at him as if she wanted to eat him. She was a spear wife after all. "Why would I need to know that?" said Ygritte as she moved away from the two, leaving Jon like that while Edward smiled after seeing this scene. "You still have time, little Jon. If you could not make her fall for you, then you are an idiot," said Edward as he teased the innocent boy. Jon only managed to get close to the girl because he was following his mission. If it was not for that, it was no way for Jon, who was just an innocent 15 or 16-year-old boy at that time and did not touch a woman in his life, to succeed in seducing this badass girl. 2 days later, Edward and his group arrived at White Harbor. After meeting with Lord Manderley and discussing some things related to the cooperation between both sides, Edward and his children aboard their ship. A half an hour later, they started moving towards their home, Storm's Eye, while saying their goodbyes to the north and its adventures. Chapter 182, The Situation in Pentos. Edward stood near the ship's stern and took a final look at the north since he would not visit it for some time. The next time he would come back to the north would be the time for the great and final battle that the north would witness. He turned to look at his children before turning to Jon and Arya and spoke. "Say your farewell. Things would not be the same when you two come back here again," said Edward with a calm expression while looking at the horizon. The two young children would not understand what he meant by saying those words, neither would his children. No one could possibly guess that Edward was referring to a great calamity that would threaten everyone's existence. But Edward had been preparing since forever for this battle, and he was sure that he could win since he invented enough weapons that would use wildfire and dragon glass to kill those bastards. Not to mention that Edward had taken the free folks away and prevented the Night King from adding them to his armies. Anyway, the two decided to listen to Edward's words and stayed a little near the stern to pay their farewell to their home. Although they did not understand what Edward had said earlier, they could get that their lives would change from this moment since Ned Stark decided to go south towards King's Landing. They remembered what happened to their grandfather and uncle when they rode south. As for Edward, he returned to the captain's cabin since he received a word from Alysana Stone from Pentus a moment ago. He wanted to read it carefully and decide his next course of action since it must be related to the young Daenerys and her idiotic brother. At first, Edward intended to manipulate the young girl and convince her that he was on her side by bending the knee. He would then use her towards the end before killing her after achieving his goals, but he changed his mind. Edward decided to recruit the young Daenerys, who was still young and naive at this moment, to his side. She would be a great addition to the group, especially towards his son, Raymond. Although Edward did not show favoritism on the surface and treated every one of his children equally, he had to admit that he liked Raymond the most, deep down in his heart since he was his first child. He decided to let Raymond live the moment and enjoy having two Targaryen beauties towards the end. After he opened the message and saw what it said inside, he was not surprised since he already knew what would happen from the show and books. It seemed that idiot Viserys intended to make his sister, Dany, marry the Dothraki Khal named Drogo in order to get a man's army of savages. Alysana's letter specified that Khal Drogo would come to Pentos to see Daenerys after 4 days. Edward had to admit that Viserys really had no brains, or else how could he get convinced that he could take back the kingdoms with the help of Dothraki, who Edward defeated again and again. After thinking for some time about this issue for a good solution for this matter, Edward decided to write his course of instructions to Alysana in order to let her start with Plan B since Plan A was not suitable anymore to his preference. Edward at once reviewed the nearest ship of his ships which would go to Pentos to deliver the message for his men on it. Yet, it was using this way that Edward could control all these lands in his vast empire. Edward did not stop making ships even for a second in the past 15 years. Not only that, but he managed to modify the ships and make them better with the help of the crafters and blacksmiths. They even managed to use the wildfire to generate some kind of energy, which helped them produce a prototype for a steam engine, but this time it used the heat from the wildfire to run instead of a coal. At the moment, the number of Edward's ships had exceeded 2,501 long ago, and he should have near 3,000 ships. Edward himself lost count since he turned bored when it came to this matter. Although not all those ships were suitable for battles, Edward had more than 1,800 ones at the end good for naval warfare. The other 1,000 ships were trading ships that travel everywhere in the known world. Edward used these large fleets to travel his lands from Lorth in the north to Volantis in the south. He did not use them only for trading, but he sent some of his men on every ship to receive secret messages and deliver others to those cities. That was why he was able to communicate with those faraway cities with ease. And with the new discoveries about how to use the wildfire, it only took a day or two at max before the new message could reach its destination since ravens could not go all this way in such a small amount of time. Edward managed to rule those cities with iron fists since he would know if there was any problem or corruption the next day it happened. After sending the letter to the next ship that would head to Pentos, Edward got out of the captain's cabin and allowed the real captain to return there. He then found his children and decided to train them all with Jon and Arya while traveling on the ship's board. 3 days later, in Pentos, Magister Illyrio Marpetus was standing with the Targaryen siblings on some stairs, waiting for Khal Drogo's arrival. The two men did not care about the young Daenerys' feelings from the start and were only planning to sell her to the Dothraki horde in order to gain an army that would enable them to take the Seven Kingdoms back. Alysana Stone was standing behind Daenerys Targaryen while looking at the young girl with some worry in her eyes. She had just received her king's message the day before and knew that the king had decided to save the young Daenerys and ordered her to use their second plan. Although Alysana was so loyal to her king and would kill the young Daenerys if the king asked her to do that, she still sighed in relief after knowing that her king decided to take Daenerys to his side. She had stayed by the young girl's side since she was 8, so she grew a little close to her 5. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 183, Daenerys and Alysana. Age. 17 and will be 18 after Robert's death. 1-2 Axel Baratheon. Age. 16 3 Lionel Baratheon and Orys Baratheon. Age. 14 and will be 15 after Robert's death. 5 William Baratheon and Teresa Baratheon. Age. 11 and will be 12 after Robert's death. 7 Jasmine Baratheon. Age. 9-1-8 Ygritte Baratheon. An adopted daughter. Age. 15. Here's today's first chapter. Only one chapter tomorrow. Sorry for that. 1 Thanks for your support. You can read up to 25 advanced chapters on my Patreon. https://www.patreon.com/Nana A. Enjoy. No one knew that she was working for Edward except the young Daenerys, since Edward instructed her to reveal this information since he wanted Daenerys to trust Alysanne and him by doing that. Although they caused some problems at first, since Daenerys did not expect the maid that was protecting her all this time and did not care at all about her brother got sent by the enemy in order to serve her, she was able to get over it in the end, especially with Alysanne's special care in the past 6 years. Alysanne started to explain everything that happened in the past to the young girl. She showed the young girl the heroism and bravery of Edward and how he faced her brother, Rhaegar. Her brother was the one who is responsible for everything that happened to her family, as he kidnapped and raped the innocent girl, Lyanna Stark. She did not forget to tell her about her father and how he killed Edward's brother, the Vale's heir, and the North's lord and heir. Alysanne told her how Edward fell out with King Robert after what happened in King's Landing, since he only agreed to go on with Robert's plans of rebellion to save his lands from her father and save the Targaryens' children. It was the Lannisters who killed Princess Elia Martell and her children in the end. But Edward managed to save Daenerys and her brother by taking Dragonstone and allowing her and her brother to leave. Of course, Daenerys did not believe Alysanne, even if she was naive at that time. She was a dragon, after all, and only listened to her family. But when Daenerys asked Alysanne why she came here and why she did not protect her brother, Viserys, in the same way, Alysanne told her that Edward asked her that because he lost his hopes in Viserys, who was just an idiot. But Edward wanted the young Daenerys to stay pure. Daenerys came to believe Alysanne in the end, since Alysanne defended her many times against assassins sent to kill her by Robert. She also came to hate her brother, Viserys, since he did not care about her in the last 4 years, and everything Alysanne told her was true. She did not trust what Illyrio told Viserys and started distancing herself from her idiotic brother, who would kill himself by his foolishness one day. After hearing that Illyrio and Viserys arranged such a marriage with a savage from the Dothraki, Daenerys' hatred did not have a limit and shot towards the sky. Alysanne, who was standing behind Daenerys, came close to her and put her hands on Daenerys' shoulders to reassure Daenerys that she would protect her as always, even if she had to fight Viserys and the Dothraki. Daenerys looked back at Alysanne and smiled after taking a deep breath to calm herself. She knew that she only had Alysanne at the moment who really cared about her. "I will come to your room tonight to tell you some good news," said Alysanne with a smile as she whispered in Daenerys' ears so that the other two could not hear her. Before Alysanne returned to her post, though, she looked at the two men with murderous eyes. Her king also instructed her about what she should do about the two men. He did not forget to ask her to take out the dragon's eggs in Illyrio's vaults. Edward had been buying all the dragon eggs in the market to be ready for the time when the blood ritual's effect would appear. Daenerys nodded her head to Alysanne before turning to look at the two men in the front. She decided to give her brother a final chance to prove that he cared about her one last time before leaving him. She would ask him to annul this marriage with a savage from the Dothraki after this meeting. "Where is he?" asked Viserys with an impatient voice as he looked at Illyrio, since he hated to wait for anyone. He thought that everyone was supposed to wait for him instead. "The Dothraki are not known for their punctuality," said Illyrio with a smile on his face as if he wanted to entertain the prince, getting a smirk from Viserys. Although Illyrio thought that the Dothraki were savage and deserved to die, he feared that they would attack his city, so he decided to kiss their asses. The other free cities are the Storm King's property at the moment, and the Dothraki were afraid of that man. Even Khal Drogo got defeated multiple times in the past at the hands of Edward's armies, making his horde shrink to nearly 25,000 men. Although that was the case, Drogo's horde was still the largest since Edward's army made sure of that. Not long after that, Khal Drogo and his blood riders rode through the city with their horses. At this moment, Drogo was so much different from the show and books. His head was shaved with his men, since not only did he get defeated, but he got defeated twice. The first time was on Brienne of Tarth's hands. That action made Edward announce that Brienne deserved to be one of his king's guard, allowing her to challenge one of them, managing to secure a place for herself in the end. The second time was on Axel Baratheon's hand, just in the previous year. Don't think that because Axel was young, he would not defeat Drogo. Axel's body was large, enough to surpass Edward's body in his prime. His strength alone should be equal to the mountain in a few years. As for Edward, since he decided to never play with his sword or spear against others and hide in the shadows, he would not come out to fight Drogo, who Edward could defeat with a little scheme. For Edward ordered his men not to kill Drogo after defeating him, since he planned to let him take Daenerys at that time. Since he changed his mind, Edward did not need to care about Drogo's life anymore and would send his men to kill him with the rest of the Dothraki hordes. Illyrio started to kiss their asses and presented Viserys and his sister to that savage. When Daenerys saw him in this sorrowful state, she did not feel attracted to the man, since he was not the same strong warrior. As for Viserys, he pulled his sister to him and spoke. You know why they are in this state. They got defeated by that usurper's brother's son, who took Storm's land and calls himself Storm King now. But I don't care, since the man still has 25,000 savage men at his disposal. With those men, I will manage to take what is rightfully mine. I know that the lords are waiting for me to return, and they would help me defeat that usurper and his brother. I will let him, his 25,000 men, and their horses fuck you if that means I will get my army," said Viserys as he laughed madly in his sister's ears, getting her disgust by the minute. Chapter 184, Sneaking Daenerys Out. She did not believe that the brother who took care of her when she was a child would treat her like that, but what could she say? "Come forward," said Illyrio as he finished his speech with Drogo and looked at Daenerys. Although Daenerys did not want to move this time, her brother pushed her forward to meet the man. He promised to mess with her later for behaving like that. If Viserys did not need the Dothraki horde to get his army, he would have fucked his sister and took her as his wife, since he wanted to honor the Targaryens' habits. Drogo, who looked funny with his head shaved like that, seemed satisfied with Daenerys' beauty and turned around to leave the city with his men. Viserys, who saw this scene, panicked since he thought that the plan of getting a Dothraki's army failed. "Where is he going?" asked Viserys, who came running to Illyrio to ask him what happened. "The ceremony is over," said Illyrio with a smile. He was wondering why he and Varys supported this idiot who would get them dead in the end. But he did not say anything. "Did he like her?" asked Viserys with a panicked voice, since he was afraid that the army would fly away from his reach. "Trust me, Your Grace. If he did not like her, we would know. It won't be long now. You will cross the narrow sea and take your father's throne. The people drink secret toasts to your health. They cry out for their true king," said Illyrio with a meaningful gaze, throwing the young man in the illusion of near victory. In the back, Alysanna could not help but smirk as she followed the three, since she did not know whether to laugh or cry at Viserys' idiocy for believing such words. She came close to Daenerys and made a funny face to make the gloomy girl smile a little. The two men in the front continued their talk about the wedding. "I know how to play a man like Drogo. I give him a queen, and he gives me an army," said Viserys to Illyrio while talking. After hearing those words, Daenerys decided to give her brother his final chance before disregarding any relationship between the two of them and escaping with Alysanna. "I don't want to be his queen. I want to go home," said Daenerys, hoping that her brother would return to the one she loved before, but her dreams got crushed by his following words. "So do I, but they took it from us. So tell me, sister, how can we return home? We need an army, Khal Drogo's army. I would let his whole tribe fuck you and their horses too, if that is what it took," said Viserys while holding Daenerys' chin when he said that before kissing her forehead after seeing her disappointed gaze without caring about her anymore. After that, Viserys and Illyrio moved to Illyrio's house while chatting on their way there. Alysanna, who saw this scene and heard the two men's words, came close to Daenerys and hugged her a little from behind to console her as the girl was about to cry too. "Don't worry. I would not let that happen to you. I will tell you the plan when we are alone at night," said Alysanna with a smile after seeing Daenerys in that state. That night, after Daenerys retreated to her room after all the shit that happened that day, she did not sleep and waited for Alysanna's arrival. She did not know what kind of good news Alysanna brought with her this time to please her. It did not take long, and after everyone slept, Alysanna sneaked into her room. When she saw Daenerys, she could not help but smile at the innocent girl. Daenerys, who saw her arrival, could not help but smile at her. "You came," said Daenerys with a smile as she patted the bed to tell Alysanne to sit beside her. Of course, I would come to tell you the good news. Listen here, Missy. I received the king's orders this morning. He ordered me to take you away from this city and sneak you out with one of our ships, said Alysanne as she smiled at Daenerys. She thought she would see the girl smile after hearing this good news, but Daenerys' expression changed instead. What is wrong? Asked Alysanne after seeing this. Why would he ask you to do that? Is he trying to kill me as well? Asked Daenerys with a white face since she thought what she said was possible. Stop, stop, stop. I will let you see that part of the message to make you feel at ease, said Alysanne as she took a piece of paper out, giving it to Daenerys. These are the king's exact words. There is no one in that house that deserves a second chance but Daenerys Targaryen. She would make a good queen. You have to take her out of there, Alysanne, said Alysanne as she repeated the words in the paper. Is that true? Asked Daenerys in surprise since she did not think that Edward would make her the queen. Yet, Missy. His Grace intended to marry you to His Highness, Raymond. He would make you the queen after Robert dies. He also said that Robert would die this year, said Alysanne with a smile after seeing the girl's expecting expression. Daenerys was a Targaryen, after all, and ruling Westeros was her dream. I have already prepared everything for you. You only need to follow me to the port and take the ship waiting for you back to Storm's Eye, said Alysanne as she remembered the rest of Edward's mission. What? You are not coming with me? Asked Daenerys with shock in her voice since she thought that Alysanne would accompany her. I still have work to do here. I will follow you after a month from now, said Alysanne while helping Daenerys wearing her cloak. What about my brother? Asked Daenerys since she still felt a little guilty towards her brother. Although their relationship was grave and she was not close to him anymore, Viserys was still her brother. You should forget about him, Your Highness. After you leave this city, the Dothraki would kill him and everyone in the city, said Alysanne as she pulled Daenerys' hands to make Daenerys follow her. Can't you save him? Asked Daenerys with some hesitation. She knew that she could not do that to Alysanne and make her take this risk for her. Alysanne looked at Daenerys' eyes and remembered Edward's words. He had told her that this situation might happen. He asked Alysanne to make an empty promise since Alysanne was the one who would kill Viserys herself. She could blame one of Robert's assassins in the end. I will try, Your Highness, said Alysanne as she speeded up her steps towards the port. Chapter 185, Throwing William and Arya to the Faceless Men. It did not take long before the two arrived at the port. With the help of Edward's other men in the city, no one would find any traces about what happened here till the morning. Now, Your Highness, Bruce here will take you back to meet the king. I hope you would arrive there safely, said Alysanne as she introduced Bruce, who made this voyage personally to take Daenerys. Before she left, Alysanne kissed Daenerys' forehead and smiled too. Please, Your Highness, said Bruce as he nodded his head to Daenerys, who returned the nod back to Bruce. Although she was afraid at the moment, she decided to trust Alysanne's words in the end. She hoped that she made the right decision in her heart. Back to Edward and his children, who had just arrived at Storm's End. Before he separated from the group, Edward called Raymond to stay. Raymond, walk with me, said Edward as he looked at his first son. Is something wrong? Asked Raymond as he looked at his father. Daenerys Targaryen would arrive at Storm's End in a day or two. You would take her as your second wife, said Edward as he looked at Raymond, whose face changed after hearing those words. Although he took a lot from his father, he did not follow every step that his father made. Raymond loved his wife greatly, and he was not ready to abandon her. He did not know why his father did this. If they wanted the Targaryens' blood to rule, Rhaenys was enough for that. She had a better claim than Daenerys since she was Rhaegar's daughter. I don't think this would be a good idea, said Raymond as he shook his head. Don't worry about your wife. I am sure that she would be more than happy to have Daenerys by her side, since she would be her only family soon. But you should hide this face from her for now since she had your child in her womb, said Edward with a calm voice since he did not care much about love, especially after all he had been through with Ashura that made him regret ever choosing that path. But Raymond wanted to argue more, but Edward looked at him with piercing eyes telling him that was his final decision. Raymond was upset after seeing this. Although he admired his father, he did not like it when his father controlled his life like that. I am doing all this for you. With the two women by your side, no one would dare to stay against you. said Edward with an indifferent voice. Since he was doing all this for his child, he did not mind the means to achieve that. Raymond was not content with that, though. He did not hate Daenerys or something like that. He only did not like how his father treated him like a child and made the decisions for him. As for Daenerys, Raymond would fall in love with her in the end. Edward stood there like that without moving, looking at his son's back as he walked away. He did not know that his decisions would backfire in his face in the end. After that, Edward called William and Arya, who did not get the chance to rest after their arrival since he had to take care of one last thing before Daenerys could arrive. "What is it, father?" asked William with his laid-back attitude as always. He did not care if his father liked it or not. He just did what he liked. As for Arya, she stood there without saying anything, just looking at Edward. She wanted to have some rest since Lady Brienne promised to train her in the morning. "Come with me," said Edward as he walked away from the palace in the new black and white house's direction. It was the time for the last favor that the faceless men owed him. "Why are you taking us to this creepy place?" asked William, since he did not like to come near this place. He heard tales about it when he was young and never visited it, even for once. "To make you strong enough. You inherited your mother's small physique. That's why your training could not bear enough fruits. The same goes for Arya," said Edward as he looked at the two brats behind him. When the three entered the house and arrived at the small pool in the middle, one of the priests working as a faceless man came out. "What does the man need?" asked the faceless man, remembering the final favor they owed Edward. "I want you to train the two to become faceless men for 3 years," said Edward as he looked at the man. He knew that this request would be irritable, but he saw no other way. The man looked at Edward without saying anything to him since nothing like that happened before. They could not allow someone who trained to be a faceless man to roam outside, but they had to do their part of the deal. "The man could leave them here," said the faceless man, dismissing Edward. After hearing those words, Edward nodded his head and turned to the two. "You will stay here for 3 years. Train hard and listen to that man's words well. If you left behind that, they would kill you," said Edward with a smile, frightening the two before taking his leave. "One follow me," said the faceless man as he saw Edward leave the house. After Edward left the house of black and white, he returned to the Storm Keep. He had to think of his other plans and how to move from this point. He was sure that his son, Raymond, went to his wife to stay with her. The other brats must be staying in the keep without doing anything. Thinking about what to do from this point, Edward was pacing left and right in his chamber. He knew that Robert would die at the end of this year, and Ned Stark would follow him. Since he sent Arya to train, he did not have to worry about her for now. As for Jon Snow, Edward decided to ask him to travel far north with Ygritte to witness what was happening there. He also had to find himself an excuse to stay away from Westeros to explain why he did not have the ability to save Ned, so Edward decided to start his operation in Essos. Edward had to destroy the final 2 free cities and the Dothraki this year since he would not have much time after this year. Chapter 186, First Meeting with Daenerys. The Slavers Bay's cities and Karth would need to wait for now since Edward would come for them later. After thinking of all this, Edward decided to rest his mind since he was at the edge for days. He decided to think of who he had to send to do the job of delivering green onion to Bravos in the morning. 2 days later, it was finally the time for Daenerys' arrival at Storm's Eye. Edward forced his son, Raymond, to come with him to meet her since the idiot argued with him about this matter. Edward did not have time to play with him like that. They did not wait long in the city's port before they could see the large ship appearing from afar. This ship's captain could be none other than the admiral and his deputies. That was why everyone was surprised that Edward made one of those go himself to take Daenerys back. Anyway, the ship did not take long before docking in the port. Minutes after that, Bruce came down with sailors and marines behind his back, surrounding a tiny little girl. The girl was more beautiful than Emilia Clarke that played her role. After seeing her, Edward got tempted to take her for himself instead. He thought that he could have her for himself since his son did not want to marry her. In the end, Edward refrained from doing that since he had enough of falling for beauty. Edward turned to become like Tywin in this matter. He preferred to fuck his whore, Gisela, who worked as a maid in his keep, than falling for love again. Tywin was doing the same. He never opened his heart for another woman after Joanna's death, but did not prevent himself from fucking a whore here and there. Haha, welcome to Storm's Eye, Daenerys. It is great to see you. I wanted to see you since Alysanna sang praises about you in her letters. said Edward as he went ahead to touch the girl and give her a hug. He wanted to know how it felt down there when he did that. The last sentence was the author's thought. Daenerys was still afraid that she was in danger and had been thinking all the way here how this man was going to treat her. She did not see this man before, but she knew that he was the man who killed her brother in single combat and the reason behind her family's downfall. Although Daenerys believed that the most part of the reason was her father's and brother's actions, she still blamed Edward and Robert in her heart. After hearing Alysanne's words about what Edward did after Robert and the Lannisters sacked King's Landing, Edward gained her respect, though. "The honor is mine," said Daenerys as she looked at Edward. She did not know how to address him. Was she going to speak to him as if he was the king? The title was belonging to her family, though. Edward did not mind since he knew if Daenerys agreed to call him something like Your Grace, he would think something was wrong with her. Although Daenerys was a little naive at this point, she was a dragon that refused to bow to anyone. "Don't worry about titles here and there. Just call me Edward, and I will call you Dany," said Edward as he smiled at her face after she heard the nickname that he had given her. "Come here. Let me introduce you. This one here is my son, Raymond. He will be your husband soon," said Edward as he pulled Raymond to the front. Although Raymond found Daenerys more beautiful than her niece, Rhaenys, he wasn't willing to harm the relationship between him and his wife because of Daenerys. "It is an honor to meet you," said Raymond with his usual smile as he looked at Daenerys. He was not doing that to attract her to him or something. He was only putting on his usual face when he met strangers. "The honor is mine," said Daenerys as she looked at Raymond carefully to check him out. The man would become her husband if everything went smoothly. She had to admit that she was satisfied after checking Raymond's body and face. He was excellent goods in her eyes. That was much better than the savage Dothraki. "Let's go. I have to tell you something, but it has to be only the three of us," said Edward with a serious expression on his face. He had to tell Daenerys sooner or later about Rhaenys, or the things would go south. Daenerys, who did not understand what was wrong, only nodded her head. After seeing that Edward did not intend to kill her, she was relieved and decided to go with Alysanne's words. Edward took the two back to the Great Hall in the Storm Keep, where they could talk alone. Although he prevented anyone from entering the military port, since he did not want any little bird to discover Daenerys' arrival, he did not want his officials to know that Rhaenys was Rhaegar's daughter. "Take your seat, little Daenerys. You have to know what you will go through from this point," said Edward as he looked at Daenerys. When he saw her looking at him, waiting for him to continue, he spoke again. "I know that I promised you that you would marry Raymond. But I will give both of you a chance out of this marriage. If you want to marry any of my other sons, I will allow it, but your chance of becoming a queen would be minimal," said Edward with a calm tone. He was not saying those words to Raymond, though, since he knew his son's mind. After hearing those words, Daenerys' expression changed a little since she thought that Edward would go back on his words. She heard how the lords manipulated everyone to their benefits, but did not expect Edward would do the same, even after hearing about how honorable he was. "Don't give me this face. I did not lie to you. There are some things that even Alysanne did not know." "Well, Raymond already has a wife," said Edward as he saw the change in Daenerys' expression, who looked back at Raymond. "His wife is actually your niece, Rhaenys Targaryen, your brother's daughter. I have been taking care of her since she was a child. In the end, the two fools fell in love and married 2 years ago. She should give birth in a month or something like that," said Edward while looking at Daenerys' face. He could see clearly the different emotions in Daenerys' eyes after she heard his words. Chapter 187, City of Ghosts. Everyone would do the same. Rhaenys was the only female Targaryen beside her, and she was happy to hear that. But that also meant that she was a threat to her position as the queen. "I said this because I wanted you to know everything. I did not tell anyone that Rhaenys is alive, and no one knows that she married Raymond, as well. Don't be mad at Alysanne for that," said Edward as he shook his head and waited for Daenerys to say a word. "Can I see her?" asked Daenerys after some thinking. She wanted to see her niece before making any decision. "That would be impossible for now, at least, since I don't want to endanger her child for any reason," said Edward as he shook his head. Of course, something like that would be impossible at the moment. Daenerys could understand Edward's reason but felt some envy in her heart. Her niece got ahead of her at marrying Raymond. Not only did she secure her position as the first queen by marrying Raymond first, but she was about to give birth to a child even. Although Daenerys intended to take her time to think slowly about this matter, She did not expect to hear all this at one go. She got to know about his surprise one after another. "So what do you think?" asked Edward as he looked at her waiting for her reply. Daenerys looked at Edward's face before turning her head to Raymond. She continued to look at him like that for a while before coming up with a decision. "I want some time to think about this," said Daenerys as she looked at Edward. Although she preferred to have the man all for herself, she could not convince herself to let the queen's position go away from her too. "As you like. I asked the maids to prepare a room for you where no one would visit except Raymond and me. Alysanna would visit you when she returns as well," said Edward with a smile as he stood up and came close to her before hugging her again. "You will be my daughter by law, either way, so don't worry. I won't let a diamond like you go to waste," said Edward with a smile after letting her go. Edward asked Raymond to take Daenerys to her room, allowing Daenerys to take this chance to hook up with Raymond. Edward knew exactly how Daenerys was good at these things, and he should have warned his son about this matter, though, since he did not want Daenerys to control everything he worked for in the end. After thinking about that, Edward started to implement his other plan. He had chosen the person that would do the task for him. Yet, Edward could come up with one person that he did not know anymore. After Daenerys joined his group, Edward would not Varys anymore. He thought that he could get rid of this spider this early in order to get rid of any problem that might come in his direction because of that man. Since Varys owed him since the rebellion, Edward decided to ask for payback for what Varys did. Edward would ask Varys to give a gift to the cellar of Bravos that would carry the virus. He had already convinced the young Aegon to go to Pentos through Robstone. Edward started putting a good plan for his next course of action in the next few years. It took him nearly a month to implement the whole required plan. He started executing it at once and sent a letter to Varys. He told Varys that if he wanted Edward to forgive him for what happened in the past, he had to do him this favor. Edward explained that he needed him to convince Bravos to surrender their power to him and make sure to send that gift to the cellar. He instructed him not to open it, or he would kill himself by doing that. Of course, Varys, as always, would be suspicious of such an invite. He searched the whole gift from the outside without opening it. Of course, Varys would not find anything wrong because the virus was hidden in the seasonings and would not spread without contact. Varys must have thought that Edward put poison in the seasonings. He did not realize that it was not just seasonings in those jars, but a deadly virus that would kill him and everyone in Bravos 3. Edward's plan for the whole year had moved in the direction he wanted. Varys went to Bravos and met the cellar, said some pleasantries before giving him Edward's gift. The cellar asked his men to cook them a meal with the seasonings, making Varys' face change after hearing that. But he decided to go with that since he would not eat and only look at the cellar as he ate himself. His plan did not take the correct path, though, since the virus spread at once after a few minutes. It only took 2 days before the tens of thousands living in Bravos to take their last breath and die in agony. No one survived that epidemic, and the matter spread to everyone in the world, making them tremble in fear except some savage Dothraki. No one was not afraid of Edward's method, since they did not even realize how Edward had done something like that. They also knew that if Bravos and everyone in it died like that, it meant that something like that could happen to them as well. Some people said that what Edward did was sorcery, while others said that he called the gods upon the city to make it like that. Since no one could not get close to Bravos because they were afraid of what might happen to them, even the Citadel could not find a reasonable answer to that situation. Bravos would be known as the City of Ghosts for 3 years, as many travelers would swear that they would hear the dying men's screams asking for their help when they would get close to the Isles of Bravos, making them tremble in fear. This matter got recorded in history as the obliteration of a great city in 2 days. What Edward did to Bravos turned into one of the world's mysteries, since no one got to see this virus again. After getting rid of Varys and everyone from Bravos with him, Edward turned his eyes to the Dothraki horde since he decided to leave Pentos until the time he would get to use Aegon Targaryen. As for Viserys and Illyrio, they died a week after Daenerys left by Alysanna's hands. Edward heard that Viserys had a very painful death too. Chapter 188, The Mess in King's Landing. Edward heard that before Viserys died, he begged for his life for days before that because Alysanna tortured him to her heart's content. Alysanna must have hidden her anger at this scum all these years, or she would not have done something like that. As for Illyrio, he died a quick death since Alysanna did not want to hear his voice. After killing the two, Alysanna managed to get all Illyrio's wealth with the rest of the men's help. She also managed to find the 3 dragon eggs that Illyrio had bought long ago. With the addition of those 3, Edward had 15 dragon eggs in his hand right now, and he intended to use them at the end of this year. Since the blood ritual's effects should show up at that time, Edward intended to check if the fire would hurt him or not. If it did not, that meant that he and his children would finally have the ability to bind with a dragon. Edward would experience riding a dragon in a few years if everything went as planned. Edward did not know that he would have to face an enraged Night King in a few years. Due to Edward's actions of arming the Night's Watch and taking the free folks away, the Night King would use a desperate means to get minions. Anyway, Edward turned his head towards the Dothraki and led the attack himself this time. He had the intention of killing every one of them. He would set Viz Dothrak on fire and build a new city in its place in order to connect the east and west through the land as well. Edward had been fighting them for 5 months and had killed hundreds of thousands of them, making the Dothraki desperate enough to unite their strength under Khal Drogo to fight Edward in a final battle. 75,000 Dothraki riders gathered near the forest of Cahir, intending to sack the city with Edward and his men. Of course, Edward was prepared for those savages and gathered an army of 100,000 with war chariots and war engines capable of destroying any army. Edward was not arrogant by meeting the Dothraki in an open field like the Dothraki Sea, but he knew that the Dothraki without a horse was nothing in front of his men. Edward had thought of a plan to get rid of their horses before the battle. That was why he did not take the fight to their city and let them come to him instead. So Edward had poisoned the water and the grass near the battlefield. He intended to kill as many horses as possible by doing that before they would even fight. His plans proved effective, since the Dothraki lost more than half of their horses before the battle, killing their morales with the horses. Those without horse made the Dothraki lines crumble from within, opening the opportunity for Edward and his men. Edward did not wait and took this chance to start an all-out attack on the Dothraki, killing tens of thousands until he reached their only city, Viz Dothrak. The blood of the men he killed created a small lake that would be known as Lake of Dothrak Whales. Edward did not stop at this point, but he attacked their city and killed more than 100,000 humans in the process. He did not even leave a mate or a slave. Everyone in Viz Dothrak did not see the light after that day, turning this city into another ghost city that Edward created. During Edward's campaign, the situation in King's Landing had reached a different turning point. Since Jaime Lannister lost a hand to Edward in Winterfell, he and his sister hated Ned Stark to the core, especially Cersei, who had been planning to get rid of her husband and Ned at the same time. Not only did Jaime attack Ned Stark after Catelyn kidnapped Tyrion and took him to the Vale, but he also cut Ned Stark's left hand, making him experience the pain and humiliation he went through in Winterfell. He did not care about honor since he already could not fight well after he came from Winterfell. Robert was an idiot like always and did not listen to Ned when he told him that he wanted revenge. At that point, Ned was insistent on leaving back to King's Landing since he knew that he did not want to risk his life and his family for a lost case anymore. He was trying to advise his daughter, Sansa, who was making a fuss about how her life was about to change after marrying the prince and staying in King's Landing, when Peter Baelish cut their talk too. At that time, Peter Baelish told Ned Stark Jaime's and Cersei's affairs directly, stopping him in his plans, making him delay returning to the north. At this moment, Ned was heading to Robert's chamber to tell him the truth. Ned did not know that Peter Baelish did not just tell Ned Stark the truth, but he went and told Cersei that Ned knew about her secret and intended to expose her in front of Robert. Cersei, who had already thought of a good plan to get rid of Ned and Robert, speeded up to meet Robert before Ned could. She met Robert and started talking about various things looking harmonious. Without him knowing, she put a strong poison in the wine cup before giving it to Robert to drink. When Ned arrived, he saw Robert and Cersei there. "Robert, can I talk to you alone?" asked Ned Stark, hinting to Cersei to leave the room. Robert, as Ned's good friend, would, of course, listen to Ned. "Leave us, woman," said Robert as he looked at Cersei with a gleam in his eyes. He had already drunk a lot and was not on the right state of mind. Cersei looked at Ned Stark with hatred in her eyes before standing up to leave the room, but before she did, she smirked at Ned as she thought that he was an idiot. Her plan was moving smoothly, and she would get rid of that eyesore that day. She would have to deal with Ned's little bitch since she did not plan to let her son marry that girl. The poison that she gave Robert was not a normal one. It would make Robert lose his senses and make him attack anyone near him. Once Seer Barristan was not in the city since Robert sent him to do some job outside the city. The other king's guards were all loyal only to her. She estimated that Ned would kill Robert while defending himself or let Robert kill him. Anyway, she would kill the winner too. Chapter 189, Robert's Death. In the chamber, "Robert, I have to tell you something important," said Ned as he came close to Robert and took the cup away from him, since he needed Robert to be sober at least. "What is it, Ned?" said Robert with some annoyance in his voice, since he did not like it when Ned took the cup from him. "Cersei had been cheating on you with her brother," said Ned with a hesitant voice, since he did not know how Robert would react after hearing that. Robert's face turned red from anger after hearing what Ned said. "What are you saying, Ned?" said Robert with red eyes as he looked at Ned as if he was about to attack him. It seemed that the poison Cersei prepared had finally taken effect, and Robert started losing his mind. Jon Arryn was investigating this as well, and he got killed by them after finding out the truth. "It seems that the 3 children are not yours but Jaime's. She had been doing that act since both of you married," said Ned with some worry in his voice. He did not suspect anything because he would turn angry if he heard such a piece of news. Robert's face turned red entirely this time after hearing that, and his eyes turned white as well. Ned, who saw this scene, finally realized that something was wrong with Robert and tried to leave the chamber and ask the Grand Maester for help as he thought that his friend got poisoned. Not only was the door closed from outside, but Robert started attacking him as well the next second. "Wake up, Robert," said Ned as he was receiving a punch after another from Robert. Ned had already lost an arm and could not fight someone with a Baratheon strength. He tried to defend himself, but he could not since Robert was attacking him like an animal. Ned tried to use all his strength to push Robert a little far from him since he did not want to die like that. He used his shoulder to force Robert back as hard as he could and rammed towards the door. Unfortunately, after Robert hit the wall, a hanging sword fell from above, making his way towards Robert's chest, killing him in his place, while Ned, who saw this scene, could not help but stand there in his shock. He could not believe what just happened. Ned could not believe what he just did to Robert at this moment. He stood there like an idiot since he could not believe that he killed his childhood friend with his own hands just like that. Although he hated Robert for many things that Robert did in the past and caused his sister's death, he never thought he would kill Robert one day with his own hands. Ned was an honorable man and would never break the oath he made to Robert in the past when he bent the knee in front of him. Plus, even during the time when Robert did all the horrible things that made Ned hate him, Ned never thought for a second that he would end up killing Robert. Ned would defend against anyone who tried to kill him instead since that was his oath to the man. If not for their childhood relationship, then he would do that for Jon Arryn's sake, who took care of the 3 of them and taught them all they knew. As Ned did not believe that just happened, he came close to Robert's body to check on him. He might have thought that it was just an illusion that his eyes made to trick him. But when he tried to move Robert's body and did not get any response, he was sure that Robert had died this time and for good. It might be because of Cersei's poison. But Robert did not even make a sound or a move after the sword made his way through his chest and just stayed like that. Ned could not think of what he could do next since his honor prevented him from leaving the city like that without finding the person responsible for Robert's behavior. But if anyone found out what happened in this place, not only him but his daughter, Sansa, would be in danger. He thought that no one had figured what happened since he could not open the door earlier. He did not realize that everything that happened that day was Cersei Lannister's doing. At a time like this, the human's mind starts to give us false hopes and convince us that what was happening around us was just normal. Ned could only think of getting away from King's Landing with his daughter. He did not know that every move he made was already in Cersei's calculation, since she would never let him leave this place like that. Ned used his only hand to use an axe to break through the door. Ned could not do that earlier because Robert attacked him suddenly from behind and gave him no time to break the door. Plus, he was surprised that the door got locked from outside in the first place. Ned felt that something was happening, but he did not realize what it was. Or we could say that he did not have the time to figure that out. Anyway, after he got out from Robert's chamber, he could not see any of Robert's Kingsguard or anyone else. He was sure that something wrong was going on around here, but he did not have the time to think it through since he had to get his daughter out of King's Landing before anyone could find out what happened to Robert. After that, he would have the ability to investigate what happened that day thoroughly and punish those who were responsible for today's accident. As Ned hurried to his daughter's chamber, he did not realize that some people were tracing him without him realizing. Ned did not know that most of the soldiers he took with him from the north had already gotten killed by Cersei's men. No one was left alive to tell the tale on another day. In fact, all King's Landing was under the Lannisters' men and the Golden Cloak's control. When Ned arrived at his daughter's chamber, he did not wait and entered without knocking, taking Sansa, who was daydreaming on her bed, by surprise since she did not expect her father to enter her room like that. "Father!" shouted Sansa as she looked at her father with resentment in her eyes. She was trying to act like a lady as her mother taught her. Her father's acting like that bothered her and might cause her to lose her chance of marrying the prince. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 190, Taking Ned Stark Down. There is no time. Tied up your things. I am sending you back to Winterfell, said Ned as he hurried his daughter to do as he wanted. He did not know when everything would go south or when someone would discover Robert's body. He would surely get blamed for what happened, and his daughter would take some blame as well. What about Joffrey? Asked Sansa as she shouted at her father for telling her that since she would be a queen in a few months if she married the prince. We don't have much time. Hurry up, said Ned with some loud voice, as he did not have time to care about Sansa's little mind at this point. He did not care if he got killed, but he could not allow his daughter to stay in King's Landing and expose her to danger like that. You can't do that, said Sansa while stopping her father from taking out her things and putting them back in their places. At this time, Sansa proved how idiot and naive she was when she had just came to King's Landing. Catelyn Stark's teaching had fucked everything up, even for Ned. This isn't a punishment. We have to go now, said Ned as he did not know how to bring the matter of Robert's death to Sansa, who behaved like an idiot like that. No. I am supposed to marry Prince Joffrey. I love him, and I am meant to be his queen and have his babies, said Sansa as she was still dreaming about all this nasty stuff at a time like this. Ned started to get angry at his daughter for behaving like that. He was about to shout at her to get her back to her senses when the thing he feared the most happened a few moments later. At this time, Meryn Trant led another 2 king's guards and few golden cloaks and broke Sansa's room's door without hesitation. Meryn Trant was happy to do something like that since he loved to torture and fuck up other people. From behind the group that had just entered the chamber, Cersei came out. She looked at Sansa and Ned with hate and mockery in her eyes. Going somewhere, Lord Stark? Asked Cersei as she looked at the man, who tried to shield his daughter behind his back when he saw those men breaking into his daughter's chamber. What is the meaning of this? Asked Ned as this is all he could say in this situation. He looked at Cersei's eyes and could finally figure out that he got played by this woman to the end. He finally realized that she was taking revenge for what happened in Winterfell. The only thing that he did not know was how she managed to figure out that he was about to tell Robert that Cersei was fucking her brother. He still could not trace what happened to Petyr Baelish since the man had helped him a lot since he came to Winterfell. Don't you know what happened, Lord Stark? We found King Robert dead a while ago in his chamber with a sword in his chest. According to many people, you are the last one that got seen with Robert in his chamber. I personally could confirm that since he asked me to leave both of you alone, said Cersei with a smile on her face as she looked at Ned with a victorious smile. At this moment, our bitch, Cersei, had started to appear and think of killing everyone. In one blow, she got rid of Robert and Ned Stark at the same time. You don't have proof that I did that, said Ned Stark as he shielded his daughter more with his body. He knew that something was about to happen to him here in this place, and no one could save him. According to his knowledge, Stannis and Edward were far away from Westeros, fighting their war against the Dothraki hordes and taking the rest of the cities in Essos. The news about what happened today would take weeks to reach Edward. Even if he came up with many ways to solve this problem, Edward's location was too deep in Essos for any message to get to him in that place. Even if the ships took a day or two to deliver a message to a free city, to make the word reach Edward and V's Dothrak would take a week or more, since the only way to send the message would only through a raven or with a war chariot. At the moment, Edward depended on his knowledge about the events. Although some events changed, they happened around the same time as the show, with some weeks or months different at most. Ned's men were in the north, so he was not getting any help from them soon. Even if the Vale and Riverland decided to help, they would take more time. Not to mention that Tywin was already fucking up Riverland, so they would not manage to send him any help. The other lords in Stormsland could not take this decision without Edward's approval. We don't need proof to know that it was you. Take that man down, Sir Meryn, said Cersei with a smile on her face. At this moment, she felt that she owned the whole world since King's Landing was in her hands. She did not have to worry about Edward running his mouth about what she did with her brother, as the people would say that he was trying to smear their reputation to take the throne for himself. She did not realize that Edward did not need to hear those words to take her down. But Cersei had a trump card in her sleeves that she was going to use if Edward dared to threaten her. Cersei began to think of the day where she would kill Edward for all the humiliation that she had been through on his hands. She did not forget for a second what he did to her father and brother in King's Landing 15 years ago. She still remembered what he did to her not long ago in Winterfell clearly, as if it happened the day before. After hearing Cersei's words, Meryn Trant gave a cruel smile as he took out his sword and made his men surround Ned Stark. He intended to attack Ned Stark's daughter himself if Ned tried to resist or fight back. This man was a bitch, and the author wanted nothing more than putting a spike into his ass all the way out of his mouth. Chapter 191, Edward and Pycelle. Anyway, Ned, who did not want anything to happen to his daughter, could only give up on fighting to get out of here, or Sansa would die with him. He would try to ask Baelish for help since the man promised his wife that he would help Ned here if anything went wrong. The kind Ned did not realize that Baelish was the one behind whatever happened to him that day and would only know that when the time was too late. "I will come with you, but don't harm my daughter," said Ned as he looked at Cersei with anger in his eyes. If he had listened to Edward's words, he would not have to go through all this. He would have stayed and lived a long and good life with his children in the north. But he was an idiot for still coming to King's Landing. "I would not harm my son's fiancée, would I?" said Cersei with mockery in her eyes. How could she leave this filthy and savage girl to put her hand on her precious son? She would kill Sansa herself if she tried to do something like that. The author wondered what Cersei really wanted to do with her children. Did she intend to let them fuck her as well or fuck each other? This bitch was a crazy one for sure. No, father. Leave him alone," said Sansa as she started shouting when she saw the soldiers took her father by force. She could see how they were punching him here and there. Sansa finally started to realize what she did wrong a little ago. If she listened to her father, they both might be fine. "Hush. Your father did an unforgivable thing and killed the king. If you want him to keep his head, you have to convince him to bend the knee and swear his fealty to Joffrey. I will get to see you in the morning," said Cersei as she started to think of her son's future. She knew that Ned Stark's recognition would carry much weight, especially if Edward tried to take the throne for himself. "Father would never do something like that," said Sansa to Cersei as she could not believe that her honorable father would do something like that and kill his friend, Robert. "Are you saying that I am lying to you?" asked Cersei with a cold voice. She could think of another way to do that if she wanted and kill this bitch and her father, but this way was the easiest in her eyes. "No, Your Grace," said Sansa, trying to explain to Cersei since she still had some hope to marry the prince and did not want to upset his mother. But Cersei did not give her any chance to complete her sentence and interrupted her. "Then, you should do what I tell you," said Cersei with a cold voice, leaving Sansa like that before leaving the room as well. She left Sansa with only a maid by her side. Sansa continued to cry after Cersei said her words and left her chamber. She did not know what to do. But since she still wanted to become the queen and marry Joffrey, she could only convince her father to do that. Her father should do that for her since Joffrey would become his son by law after that. As for Ned, who got taken by Sir Meryn Trant, his head was spinning and working overtime. His head was trying to come up with a solution to the situation that he was in right now. Many thoughts would go through his head in every moment, calculating the possibilities of him getting out of this alive with Sansa. The problem was that he could not find any solution to save him from this situation or how he could get his daughter, Sansa, out of King's Landing. In the end, he could depend on Petyr Baelish and his wife. Ned was thinking about the advantages his side had over Cersei and the Lannister. He believed that with Tyrion in his wife's hand, he had a good shot in getting out of this situation alive. Ned could also depend on Edward and Stannis, but he did not know when the news would reach the two and when they could come back since they were at war. So he had to think of someone else. The poor Ned did not know that his idiotic wife had already lost Tyrion and let him go after winning the trial by combat in the Eyrie. In the end, Tyrion managed to recruit Bronn, who defeated the Vale's Knight and saved Tyrion. Although Edward liked Sir Bran and his skills and would like to recruit him to his side, he knew nothing about the man at all in his past life. He only remembered him as Sir Bronn, and due to the long time he spent in this world, he forgot where Bronn was born or how he looked like in the show. After a long time, he forgot about the man himself and did not remember him until recently. Ned thought that he might return to his family in the end, but he did not know that Catelyn Stark would be the reason for his death. Anyway, Sir Meryn and the Lannisters' men took Ned Stark to the dungeons to let him rot in the place until Cersei ordered them to do something else. Cersei still needed Ned Stark to acknowledge her son's birthright to rule Westeros since he was the last hand Robert had before his death. Plus, Ned Stark was the Lord of Winterfell, and she did not want to deal with his son. The next day, your father had proved that he was an awful traitor. He killed his friend and conspired to take King Joffrey's throne, said the Grand Maester, Pycelle, as he looked at the young girl who had been summoned by the Queen the first thing in the morning. That man was hideous, and Edward would torture him in the end. Pycelle was the first one of those Maesters who started attacking Edward verbally when Edward distributed the knowledge. Edward remembered when that man came with Jon Arryn to talk with him back in those days. Pycelle was saying no to this and not to that when Edward was talking with Jon Arryn. At first, Edward respected Lord Arryn and did not do anything to shut up that idiot, but when he had enough with his idiocy, Edward ordered his men to make him roam the streets naked and humiliate him. 1. Chapter 192, Cersei's Ambitions and Edward's Preparations. Edward did not stop at that but gathered the small folks who started to learn and told them what this man said, making his life turn hell when he was in Storm's End. That was why Edward preferred Maester Qyburn and the late Maester Jones who supported his move. He did not like the closed-minded people in the Citadel and would like more people like Qyburn. Cersei and Petyr Baelish, who was looking at Sansa Stark with some dirty gaze imagining God knows what, were there in the chamber as well. Cersei had been looking since the start at the girl with some disgust in her eyes since she considered all people from the north were just savages and dirty people, but she managed to hide it well since she wanted to use the girl's innocence in her favor. No one was happier than Petyr Baelish when he heard about what happened to Ned Stark. He was the one orchestrating all this, and he finally got the chance to take his revenge from the Starks for taking his beloved Catelyn. Although Brandon Stark did not get his chance to injure this idiot in the past, the two Stark boys taking Catelyn away was a crime in Petyr's eyes. Baelish found his days more enjoyable in the past 6 months since his rival, Varys, went missing since no one knew where he disappeared to, and there was no one that could stop him or stood in front of his schemes in this city anymore, except the Queen. The problem that he faced, though, was Varys' little birds. He thought that since Varys was not in King's Landing, he might have a chance to take those birds to his side. But the problem started after Varys' disappearance by 1 month. It seemed that the little birds found another master or Varys was still alive, as he could not control them. In fact, that was Edward's doing. He would not let Varys' good network and organization go to waste or fail into someone's hand, so he could not find anyone better than Qyburn, who had controlled them in his past timeline, to take them under his wing. Edward had already gained Qyburn's full trust when he allowed him to do what he wanted and provided him with all the materials required for his passion. Qyburn was one of Edward's good hands right at the moment. He would serve as Edward's hand when Stannis was out of Storm's Eye. In fact, Storm's Eye was under Jon Clynn's control at the moment, with Qyburn by his side since Edward took Stannis with him to Essos. He would not do that. My father knew how much I loved Joffrey, and he was the king's closest friend. Please, your grace, there must have been a mistake. Summon my father, and he will tell you, said Sansa as she pleaded in front of Cersei and the group. It seemed that even what happened in front of her the other day before was not enough to change her naive character. Sansa, sweaty, you are innocent, and we all know that. Yet, you are the daughter of a traitor. How can I allow you to marry my son? Said Cersei with her sweet voice, trying to trick the young girl in front of her to do what she wanted. No one was like Sansa when she was this naive. She was the easiest person to control with some good words. 1. The girl in innocent, your grace. She should be given the chance to prove her loyalty, said Petyr Baelish, since he would not allow the young girl that he wanted to fuck to get killed like that. He could not have her mother for himself, but he had the chance to get Sansa. He had already started imagining fucking the girl since the first day she arrived at King's Landing. Fine. Little darling, you must write to Lady Catelyn and your eldest brother. The word of your father's arrest would reach them soon without a doubt. They better hear that from you. If you wanted to help your father, you have to urge your brother to please the king. Tell him to come to King's Landing, and he can swear his fealty to Joffrey. But you have to convince your father to confess his crime, said Cersei as she continued to spill lies from her mouth. She wanted Ned's confession since it would take much burden from her. But of course, if she could convince Robb Stark to come to King's Landing without much effort, she could kill him in all the Stark house and get done with it. Cersei was like her father in this regard. Tywin preferred to end the house rather than think of the future troubles they would bring to him. Cersei was thinking and scheming in her heart how to get everything she wanted. She even planned to send Edward a letter telling him to come to King's Landing and bend the knee to the true king of Westeros. She always wanted to get Edward's vast lands here in Westeros and Essos. Once Cersei started to get a little arrogant after her little victory over Robert and Ned Stark and thought that Edward was the same. She had the belief that every man with a dick would think of the same thing. If she had consulted her father before doing that, Tywin would humiliate her for bringing him more trouble. Not to mention that he thought that his chances of winning against Edward were minimal, but his fucking daughter's timing was horrible. Cersei was trying to anger the beast when they did not even get the chance to handle the other lords of the Six Kingdoms. Although Cersei thought she was smart and tried to take her chance when Edward was out of Westeros with most of his armies, she did not take into her consideration that Edward had made 2 allies before he went to Essos. Plus, Edward left enough men to protect his kingdom. He was sure that 40,000 men were more than enough to take care of the Lannister until he returned. Edward had already promised the Tyrells to marry his son, Axel, and their daughter, Margaery, when he returned from Essos. He also had made up and solved his problems with House Martell, whose relationships were very close at the moment. He promised his daughter, Teresa, to Doran's son. That was why Aeron himself was with Edward in his campaign in Essos. Well, the man came to enjoy himself, and who is Edward to stop him? Chapter 193, Calling the Banners. "Will you let me see my father and talk?" asked Sansa as she looked at the queen, but one look from Cersei, and she got stopped in her speech. Cersei was playing on the girl's emotions, trying to manipulate her. "You disappoint me, child. We spoke about your father's treason, so why would you want to meet treason? I only wanted you to write to him," said Cersei, trying to fake her disappointed look, making Sansa regret saying those words. "I only meant, what would happen to him?" asked Sansa as she wanted to have some hopes that her father would live. "It depends on your brother and you," said Cersei with a crafty smile as she handed the paper and the feather to Sansa to make her write to her family. Sansa did not have a choice and had to do as Cersei said. Plus, the little girl still had some hopes to marry Joffrey in the end. A week passed since that conversation, and Cersei managed to get Sansa's letters, and at once, Cersei sent those letters to Catelyn Stark in the area and Robb Stark in Winterfell before sending her own to every lord in Westeros. Cersei was not polite with her words at all and used her father's fearsome reputation to threaten everyone who dared to refuse to swear his allegiance to her son. Although Tywin had gotten humiliated on Edward's hands more than one time already, no one could stand against Tywin and the Lannisters' army except Edward. In Winterfell, Cersei's letter had reached Winterfell and got landed in Robb's hands not long ago. Maester Luwin was the one who delivered the letter to the young lord and was waiting for his orders with Theon next to him. "Treason. Joffrey puts my father in chains, and now he is asking me to kiss his ass," said Robb with an unbelieving voice. He thought that this was the funniest joke in the world. He would be an idiot if he let something like that happen. "This is a royal command, my lord. And if you should refuse to obey," said Maester Luwin with a grave tone, as he himself did not expect such a disaster to fall on House Stark. Maester Luwin considered himself half responsible for what happened to Eddard Stark, since he was the one who approved of his idea to go with Robert. He was feeling guilty in his heart, and this time he could not retort Robb like he did last time when Robb suggested gathering the armies and attacking the Lannister after knowing that they were the ones behind Bran's accident. "I won't refuse. I will go to King's Landing but not alone. Call the banners," said Robb with some determination in his voice. Although he was waiting for this moment, he still feared what was going to happen. War was not a child's play after all. He might die with his men on the battlefield. "Shouldn't you send a word to the Storm King to inform him about your decision and consult him before doing something like that? It would be really dangerous if you move alone, my lord." "The Lannister had a lot of men," said Maester Luwin as he looked at Robb. He saw that his words were the correct decision to make since Ned Stark and Edward Baratheon were good friends, and he was sure that Edward would not wait to save his friend. Plus, if something happened, Edward was the one who would take the throne since he was the one with the most claim. Edward was the one who should have sat on the throne, not Robert nor his children after him. "Did not you hear Robb's words?" Why would we need that man to make the decision for us? Asked Theon with mocking eyes. He hated Edward to the core since he humiliated him and his family before. If it came to humiliation, he could have gotten over it, but Edward was the reason that the Iron Islands population was no more than the Bear Island at the moment. Although Edward did not participate in House Greyjoy's rebellion, and since Edward was fighting with Robert and did not intend to help during that time, that did not stop him from humiliating Balon Greyjoy and kicking him in front of his people in the Iron Islands. Edward led a fight himself against the Iron Fleet when they tried to rob his ships. After that accident, Edward did not only attack Iron Islands but also humiliated and exterminated most of their inhabitants. He also took Balon Greyjoy's left hand and right leg when he left the island. As for Theon, when Edward saw him in Winterfell, Edward humiliated him in front of the Stark without giving a shit about Ned Stark himself. Mr. Lewin turned his eyes to the idiot, who spoke to him with respect. He never liked that boy since he was the descendant of those scumbags in the Iron Islands and behaved like them. He was the happiest when he heard what Edward did to those ruffians. Lewin looked at the idiot, who was trembling in front of Edward not long ago and was bad-mouthing him at the moment. I did not see you raise your voice when the Storm King was here. I remember clearly that you had with the dogs the day he spent in Winterfell. Don't say the words that you could not handle, boy, said Lewin as he looked at Theon with disdain in his eyes. No one liked this idiot Theon except Robb, who thought Theon was his brother. Robb, who also heard Theon's words, did not look that he was okay after hearing them. He respected Edward and saw him as an idol, especially after everything Ned Stark told his children. But Robb agreed with Theon on this point, since he would not take his orders from Edward to save his own father. Theon, don't ever talk like that again about Uncle Edward. As for you, Mr. Lewin, we don't have time to wait for Uncle Edward's reply. As far as I know, he should be far deep in Essos fighting those Dothraki. I doubt that he would know about what happened in King's Landing until the next month. We can't wait that long. Plus, he would need more time to return to Westeros, said Robb, ending their conversation with this. How could he allow Edward to command the troops that he himself dreamed of leading into battles? Robb had had enough of staying there in Winterfell while his rival Axel was fighting left and right in Essos, earning more fame for himself. Chapter 194, Baelish's Schemes and Dragon Blood. Robb decided to lead the Lords of the North on his own to cross his sword with the Lannisters. If he could beat them, his name would shine more like Axel. He would appear as the hero if he managed to defeat the Lannister and save his father and sister from Cersei's hands. Lewin could only nod his head after seeing that Robb would not change his mind. Although he was proud that Robb could take this decision himself, it was still reckless to fight the Lannisters' army alone. Although Tywin's wealth could not compare to Edward's anymore, especially after he controlled the seas, he could still fund an army of 75,000 men. As for the north, it could only gather about 20,000 men at best if Robb needed them right away. In the Eyrie, Cersei's letter written by Sansa did not only reach Winterfell, but it also managed to find its way to the Eyrie. Lysa Arryn hid the letter all this time, though, and only showed it to Catelyn after she was sure that the first letter went to Winterfell. Those were Petyr Baelish's commands, and she did not wait for a second before agreeing to his words. Although Edward wanted to kill this woman more than Catelyn since she was the one who killed his foster father, she still had some uses left. That was why Edward did not kill her at once after Jon Arryn died. He waited to catch her with Baelish in the Eyrie before throwing her from the moon door himself. As for Baelish, Edward thought of a good way to kill 3 people, and Baelish was among them. Edward would prepare a spike attached to the ground before pushing those 3 men's asses towards it. Catelyn, who read the letter, was fuming with anger, especially after knowing that her sister had hidden the letter all this time. She broke into Lysa's chamber and confronted her. "You had this since days ago and did not show it to me till now," said Catelyn with anger in her voice as she looked at Lysa, who was playing with her son's hair. "He sent it to me, not you. I only showed it as a courtesy," said Lysa with an indifferent voice as she looked at her sister. In the author's mind, Lysa Arryn was the best candidate for Edward since he would be able to manipulate her to do whatever he wanted. Since Petyr Baelish make that foolish woman betray everyone, why could not Edward do the same? A courtesy. "My husband has been taken prisoner. My son intends to declare war," said Catelyn with an angry voice as she looked at her sister with some resentment in her eyes. "A war? Your son against the Lannister?" said Lysa with a mocking voice as if she did not believe that Robb would manage to achieve anything. "You are not supporting us then?" asked Catelyn, hiding her frustration in her heart. She could not get more disappointed in her sister, whose family did not mean anything to her anymore. The Knights of the Vale will remain in the Vale to protect their lord. You should ask that brute who called himself the Storm King, said Lysa, mocking Catelyn with her eyes before saying the last sentence. That was her true intention. Well, it was Baelish's intention, to be exact. Although Petyr did not meet the Storm King face to face ever and did not know how capable he was, he believed he was a dangerous opponent. Petyr Baelish intended to ruin Edward's relationship with the Stark before getting him to enter this mess. If Edward got rid of the Lannister, Petyr might have the chance to trick him and control him to do what he wanted. If the Lannister killed Edward, it would be the best, since Petyr would not have to worry about Edward, who had those achievements in the past. Petyr did not know that the true schemer was not him anymore. There was another big player in the game who knew about Petyr and his schemes. One, you know that the Storm King is in Essos, and he would need more time to come back to Westeros, said Catelyn, since she understood that Edward would do anything to save his friend if he could. But she knew clearly that he was at war, and he should not get distracted in this situation or something much worse might happen. Isn't the man your husband's friend? You should go and ask him instead of waiting here, said Lysa, as she did not want anything more than getting rid of Catelyn Stark and making her leave the area so that she could have her sweet time with Petyr Baelish when he would come to visit her. Catelyn could not say anything more after seeing that her sister did not leave her any chance to speak anymore and left the room. Catelyn could only pray for her husband and her son to win the upcoming war. She decided to write a letter to the Storm King asking him to send some of his men to help her son if he could not come. A month had passed since Catelyn left the area. After another week, she managed to reach her son's camp near the twins. Robb wanted to move to Riverlands to help his maternal family. Jaime Lannister was besieging Riverrun at the moment. And since Robb wanted to gather the forces of the Riverlands under his banner, he had to save them. In Viz Dothrak, Edward had received a word of what happened in King's Landing a few days after Robb Stark got his letter. He had to admit that Cersei was brilliant for pulling up such a move and getting rid of Robert while framing Ned. If she did not send him that letter, he would have stood up and applauded for her scheming mind. The problem was that she did not realize the danger that already surrounded her family from every direction. She added more fuel to the flame by sending him this letter. If Edward did not have many more important things to do right now, he would have returned back and shown her what true despair was. But Edward did not have the time to go back since he was preparing for the most critical event in his life. Edward had already checked you if the effects of the blood rituals showed up or not. To his surprise, the effects started to show up. He began his experiment a month ago as he put his hands in the fire to see if the fire could hurt him, and it did not. That alone proved that he awakened the dragon blood in his veins too. Chapter 195, New Changes Beyond the Wall. After that, he went to his children and asked them to do the same to make sure that they were the same as him. Edward was sure that his children had the same fire resistance as him and could hatch a dragon egg. Well, all except William, since he was still with the Faceless Men and would need another 2 years before he could free himself. Since Edward was sure that Daenerys had the dragon blood in her veins, he only had to check on Rhaenys to see if she could do the same. As for Rhaenys, she had given birth to Edward's first grandson in Storm's Eye 5 months ago. No one wanted to see the child more than Edward, since the child's name was Edward, as well. If he got the chance to rule after Edward and Raymond, he would be the Storm Emperor, Edward, the second of his name. But Edward had to wait since he had a lot more things to take care of here in Viz Dothrak and would like to take the Slavers Bay cities before he returned. As for Karth, Edward would leave it to his man in the city. Edward would let him use the same tactics Erozone Daxus used in the other timeline. He would ask the House of Undying to do his bidding and kill the other members of the 13. Plus, Edward was sure that his daughter-by-law and grandson would be fine with Jon Clyn and Brienne taking good care of them. As for Cersei's letter, Edward could not help but smile after reading it while holding his chin. He did that because he thought of some devilish plan to fuck with Tywin Lannister and see what Tywin would do if he knew about this matter. Edward was sure that Tywin did not know that his daughter sent that letter to Edward, or he would have killed her because of her idiocy. So Edward planned to send a threat to Tywin and tell him that he was on his way back to Westeros and they would see each other next time in battle. Edward would not forget to send Cersei's letter to Tywin to mess with him more. Edward wanted to see what shameless action would Tywin come up with this time after seeing this letter. Even the great Tywin Lannister would know that Robb Stark was already enough trouble after getting defeated more than once on his hands for him to handle at the moment with the supplies from the North and Riverlands. He would never manage to defeat Edward and his armies in a battle. not to mention the Tyrells and Dorns, who would announce their allegiance soon enough. Although Edward planned to marry his son, Axel, to Margaery Tyrell, he planned to kill Olenna, even if he had to go back on his words. This poisonous woman would be a great addition to his side, but she might do something to his son, Raymond, in order to put her granddaughter on the throne. Edward did not know that his son, Raymond, thought about this already and intended to poison the woman sooner or later without anyone knowing. As for Tywin, Edward predicted that Tywin might punish Cersei for her letter, but he did not know what Tywin would offer as an apology or how he would try to solve this, since he was sure that Tywin would never go to battle with him when he had Robb Stark to annoy him. Edward could not wait and see that, but he would get surprised when that happened. Edward would never expect that Tywin's shamelessness reached such a degree and might bow his head to respect that man and his shamelessness. At the moment, Edward was gathering the rest of the Dothraki and their slaves. According to the things he read in the past years, the dragon eggs would not require only a sacrifice for them to hatch, but the more sacrifices one offered, the stronger the dragon that would come out from the egg. That was the reason why Edward did not kill all those savages directly and saved them for this moment. Edward remembered how Daenerys sacrificed the witch, Drogon's body, and herself to get the 3 dragons. If she managed to get Drogo with just the witch, what would happen if he burned 10,000 slaves? 1. The number of captured slaves and Dothraki exceeded the 200,000 head. Edward intended to make the biggest sacrifice the history had ever witnessed, and the men had ever known. Since he already had 15 eggs, all his children would manage to hatch one. Daenerys would also get one of them, and the same for Stannis, who had married not long ago. Edward allowed him to marry from House Florent this time because he wanted to save his niece, Shireen Baratheon, this time around, and let her have a good life. Edward would save another 2 for Rhaenys and her son, his grandson. The last 3 would go to his future grandchildren. Edward was standing on top of a small hill on the Mother of Mountains with his family. The captured slaves all stayed on the flat ground beneath them. Raymond and the others did not know what their father intended to do with all those slaves. For the first time, their father did not tell them about his plans, nor did he give them a hint. Even the most brilliant one, Raymond, did not know what his father planned, since he did not know about the rituals. Edward did them in secret and connected all his blood with him during those rituals, making his body melt every day for 3 years. Yet, that was the side effect of those rituals, and since Edward decided to take all the burden himself, he experiences hell of a pain. Edward wished that he could die every fucking day after those rituals. Not only did he kill his wife Ashera, but his body was literally melting when the night came before sleeping every day. Plus, Edward's daughter, Jasmine, did not say a word after what Ashera did that fateful day, making things more difficult for Edward. But Edward bore everything on his own. He knew about the danger behind the wall. He knew very well that if he could not get rid of that thing before leaving this world and letting his children rule after him, his children would be the ones that would get harmed in the end by his ignorance. But he could not win without dragons, especially when the Night King had such a big army. Yet, he reduced the numbers by a lot, but the whites continued to appear, which meant that the Night King found another source for his army. Chapter 196, Raymond and Daenerys. Even if he planned a lot and executed everything carefully, Edward calculated that their chances of winning did not go over 30%. Let's all be clear about one point. What Arya did in the show was pure luck, and the Night fucking King should not have pathetically died like that. Even Edward did not believe that the true calamity that threatened everyone for thousands of years would die like that. After experiencing everything that J.R.R. Martin did to the other characters, the author had to admit that he expected the Night King to win and kill all the living at the end of the show. But since this was the reality, Edward did not expect everything to pass easily like what happened in the original timeline. That was why Edward did not stop searching for dragon eggs and Valyrian steel that could kill that fucker. Edward knew clearly that dragons were nothing in front of that freak, since even the dragon's breath could not harm him. The only memory that did not get forgotten by Edward was the one where the Night King took Drogo's fire breath with a smile on his face. Edward planned to use the dragons against the dead army, while Valyrian steel would get used for killing that fucking Night King. "Father, why did you gather all those people here?" said Raymond, who was standing beside Daenerys. After a year of knowing each other, Raymond started to have feelings for the girl, since Dany was more beautiful than Rhaenys. Although Raymond had something for her, he did not try even doing anything, nor did he cross the bottom line. Raymond respected Rhaenys and loved her, and he would never cheat on her like that. He told Daenerys that he would only accept her after speaking with Rhaenys about this. He did not want to risk his relationship with Rhaenys like that. The girl had just given him his first son, and he would cheat on her. The poor Raymond did not know that his father fucked his mother's family after 2 years of marriage. Although Daenerys was not content with what Raymond said since she saw Rhaenys as her rival at this point, she had nothing else that she could do. Daenerys' feeling for Rhaenys was complicated at the moment. Although the two had never met, and Daenerys should like her niece since she was the only remaining family she had from her perspective, she did not like the idea of her husband caring about someone else. Plus, Rhaenys and her son were dangers for her and her future children. She heard what the Dothraki did to her brother after she left Pentos. Alysanne, who returned after a week or so wounded, told her everything happened in the city. She got to know that Viserys and Illyrio got killed by Drogon's blood riders and Alysanne got injured defending them. Daenerys hated the Dothraki after that. She insisted on coming to the battle to watch Edward and his army butchering those savages who killed another one of her family. As for Aegon and Jon Snow, Edward had no intention of telling her. One would die in the coming year while the other would have another girl he would love and leave to live beyond the wall after the war with the Night King. What Edward planned for Aegon should have started at this time. He had sent a word to Robb Stone to begin executing the plan a week ago. He ordered Robb to convince Aegon to take all the sellswords in Pentos and the Slaver-based cities and take Dragonstone. Edward had emptied the island already for this moment. He wanted Aegon to take Stannis' role from the other timeline and kill himself fighting to take the city. Edward even prepared 50 old ships and invited the pirates on Basilisk Isles to join Aegon with gold. Edward played everyone from the shadows as he wanted. Finally, what Edward sacrificed a lot for was slowly coming on his way. Edward knew very clearly that he could take the kingdoms at the moment with force with ease, but what terrified him was the disaster behind the wall. That was why Edward took this matter with ease. If he managed to get the dragons and raise them well enough at this moment, he would have a chance to fight back when that war came to him. Edward turned to Raymond after hearing his question and smiled before turning to look at the rest of his children. He did not know what his children would do when they saw him burn all those men. But they had to see with their own eyes and know that nothing came for free in this world. "Anyone can guess?" asked Edward as his eyes passed everyone, waiting for anyone who could guess something. "Are you planning to free them?" said the innocent Jasmine as she looked into her father's eyes. Yet, as you heard, Jasmine had improved a lot after all those adventures with her father. Although she did not open in front of everyone, she would speak her mind in front of Edward and the rest at least. "No, James. Father would not do something as meaningless as that," said Lionel as he patted Jasmine's head with a sly look on his face. He looked at the slaves down there and pictured many scenarios about this situation. He thought that his father would probably kill a few thousand to scare the rest. Exactly, father probably wanted to cleanse the Dothraki and would kill many of them, said Orys as he held his chin and thought a little. Although he guesses a little of the truth, he was still a lot behind getting it all. Raymond did not speak and only looked at his father. He was the one that knew his father the best and believed that his father would probably kill all those men since he gathered them here like that, but he did not find a good reason for his father's doing and did not say anything. As for Axel, he did not care about them at all. He had already played with their warriors and killed a lot with his own hands. What happened to the rest was not among his interests. Teresa did not say anything and just waited there to hear what her father intended to do. She did not like to make her brain overwork for something like that. Teresa was like Axel at this point. She had enjoyed fighting Dothraki and did not care about the rest. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 197, Stannis' Feelings. Daenerys, who did not experience Edward's true cruelty ever, would never think of what was going to happen in the next few hours, even if she did something like it in the other timeline but on a much smaller scale. As for Stannis, who was his brother for the longest time, he knew that his brother did not do that for a good reason, and he disagreed with him since they might use those slaves for more useful things. "You will know in a few minutes," said Edward as he signaled Mace Flip to finish the preparations. He asked Flip to build multiple altars where they could burn 15,000 men at the same time, and they should have already done doing that long ago. "Yes, Your Grace." said Flip before going on his way to check if everything was ready. Although Mace Flip was a kind man in nature, he was an obedient man and would do whatever Edward told him to do. The two were friends since ever. Half an hour later, Edward took the group and descended down from the mountain after seeing the soldier that got sent by Flip. It seemed that everything was going as planned. The preparation for the sacrifice was ready, and Edward was about to achieve one of his dreams and everyone's dream as well. Edward was like everyone in this matter. He wished he could experience the feeling that Daenerys and Jon Snow had when they rode the dragons. Not only could you fly up high in the sky, but you could watch your enemies burn alive with your dragon's breath. During the time when Edward waited for Flip, he thought about hatching 2 eggs at the same time for himself. He knew that he could only bind with one dragon, since he only had one body and could not ride the 2 simultaneously. But he believed that there was no one that could tell him no anyway. As for the reason and all this shit, fuck that. He wanted to have at least 2 dragons since Daenerys had 3 in the past. He would try to buy more dragon eggs in the future for his grandchildren, but this matter would be their problems and not his. After walking for another 15 minutes or so, Edward and the group could see a large altar where more than 20,000 prisoners got tied to wooden pillars connected through ropes and wood. The group still did not understand why Edward did something like that. If he wanted to kill those prisoners, he could do that easily without that much trouble. He could order the army to use the sword or spears, or even bury them alive as he did in the past. Why would Edward go this far? What did he intend to do? Everyone had been asking the same questions in their heads since Edward had been behaving mysteriously, and they could not get what he wanted or aimed for by doing all this. If Edward did not insist on staying here, the army could have moved towards Meereen and took it already before attacking the other cities. They could also have returned to Westeros by now and freed Ned Stark from the Lannisters' hands if their father wanted that. Yet, everyone already knew what happened in King's Landing. Even if Edward did not tell them, Raymond would have got the news since he already established his own information network and enough resources to get this little information. You have to know that no one in this world knew about the existence of the Shadow Legion except 2. As you have guessed, since Edward was planning to make Raymond the next king, he allowed him to know and use part of the Shadow Legion. But Raymond did not stop at that and built a small organization of his own. He intended to merge it with the Shadow Legion after he became the king. As for Stannis, he was the one that wanted to get back the most since he admired Ned Stark's personality and felt that they were alike. The two did not see anything but honor in their life, but Stannis would bear with Edward's behavior at least. When Stannis expressed his opinion to Edward and told him that he could return to Storm's Eye alone and try saving Ned Stark from the Lannisters' bastard, Edward refused his request and told him to wait. Edward told him that there were many more important things that they had to do before returning back. Those things were much more significant than Ned Stark's life, and he was not ready to waste this chance only to save Ned Stark from a little kid's hand. When Stannis heard those words, he doubted his hearing as he could not believe that Edward said those words since he witnessed with his own eyes how the two men were very close. They were like brothers, and he did not expect Edward to abandon his friend like that. Since Edward did not want to lose Stannis's trust, he told him about the danger beyond the wall. Although Edward had explained the existence of a disaster behind the wall to his children, he did not tell them what it exactly was since he knew that it would be hard to believe those myths. His family knew about the dead army, though. Edward had to explain what was behind this army. Edward told them the tales about the Night King and the Long Night. He did not forget to explain to the group that their chances of winning were minimal, since that fucking beast was unstoppable and it would be hard to kill. He explained that what they were waiting for at this moment was something that could help them a lot on their war. Stannis could only calm down a little after hearing Edward's explanation. Although he was still quite doubtful about everything that Edward said since those myths were hard to believe, he trusted his brother. He knew that his brother would not do something without any reason. If his brother said that those beasts exist, there was a high chance that was true, and he did not want to risk the world by not believing them. After that conversation, Stannis, who is always hard already on himself, tried to think of a solution to help them fighting those things, but he did not know anything about those creatures. And everything that he could think of, his brother must have come up to it much earlier since he knew about their existence. Stannis was still feeling uneasy, though. Chapter 198, Raymond's Little Thought. He did not want to leave Ned Stark to rot in King's Landing, but he also had to guard against those creatures. If Ned Stark died, the world would not die with him. But if those things got out, the world might really end. In the end, Stannis delayed Ned Stark's matter since he knew that the Lannister would never try to kill him since they knew what would happen to them if they did. Stannis could not imagine that his nephew was a crazy bastard and would shatter his dreams with his sadist behavior by beheading Ned Stark. Anyway, after Edward and the group arrived at the location, Mace Flip came forward to explain everything to Edward. "Everything is ready, Your Grace," said Flip with some hesitation in his voice. Edward explained to Flip what he was going to do. Not only was Flip the closest aide to Edward since Edward was 10, but Flip was also Edward's closest friend. When he heard what Edward planned to do, he almost shouted out loud from fright. Flip did not expect for a second that Edward planned to burn those men and then enter the fire by his own legs. Flip almost cried since he thought something went wrong with Edward's brain and only calmed down when Edward put his hand through the fire without anything happening to him. "Say it," said Edward as he looked at Flip. He knew that Mace was still afraid that something would happen to him, but what could he do? Could he let his children take the risk instead? "Are you sure about doing that, Your Grace? Please, consider it again," said Flip as he looked at his old friend's eyes. The two knew each other for more than 25 years now. Everything has a price. To win the upcoming war, even if something happened, we must go with it, said Edward with determination in his voice. He would not accept it if he came to this world and did not get the chance to ride a dragon. He would be a retard if he let this chance slip from under his hands. The group behind did not understand what these two were talking about and could only stand there. But looking at Flip's expression, they could only think that Edward planned to do something dangerous and his life might be in danger, and they became nervous, especially the little Jasmine. The little girl did not feel safe unless her father was around. Even when she was with her siblings, she would not feel like that. When she saw that Flip was worried that her father would be in danger, her heart hurt her a little, and she could not help her hands from getting close to her chest. She did not wait and sprinted to hug her father's waist, while tears started building in her eyes. "Father," said the little girl as she buried her head in his stomach. She would not care about anything in the world as long as her father was safe and nearby. She did not like that feeling that was tingling her heart and causing her that pain. Edward could not help but smile gently when he heard that word coming out of Jasmine's mouth. He was strict with all his children except Jasmine. Edward treated her like a little doll and would not forgive anyone who hurt her, even a little. He raised his hand and patted her head before speaking. "You have to trust your father and look carefully at what is coming, Jasmine. You will have to do the same," said Edward with a smile as he continued playing with her hair to make her calm down. When he sensed that she calmed down a little, Edward took her hands and moved her beside Raymond. "Whatever happened, Raymond, don't let Jasmine or the others follow me. You understand?" said Edward with a strict expression. Edward was afraid that any emotional change might cause the fire to hurt his daughter. He had read about that in a book. The fire would not hurt those with warm blood unless they were afraid of it. Look at Viserys in the canon. He had the warm dragon blood but still got burned by fire because he was afraid of it. Raymond's expression changed after hearing his father's warning. He was sure that his father would do something dangerous right now. Although he was a little worried, he had to trust his father. He had to act like a king, since he would probably be the next Storm King if anything happened to Edward. Raymond could not help it, but he really thought of this scenario, and a small part of his heart that he did not know about wished for it. Although Raymond removed that thought for now and blamed himself for thinking like that, he did not know that this thought would grow bigger and bigger in the future. Even if he did not want something to happen to his father, the situation at that time would force him to act to save the Realm 5. As for Jasmine, who had just calmed down, she freaked out again after hearing Edward's words and tried to follow him, but Raymond's grip was like it was made of steel and did not let her take another inch. Jasmine looked at her brother with resentment in her eyes and would blame him for all her life if something happened to her father. "Trust our father, James," said Raymond while shaking his head before turning his eyes back to Edward, who was talking with Flip. Raymond could not help but speak to his uncle, Stannis, who was beside him. The two were close to each other since Raymond respected Stannis, who stood beside Edward since ever. As for Stannis, Raymond was the first nephew he had when he was only 16. He had visited him when he was just a baby in Storm's End. Raymond was one of the reasons that Stannis was not gloomy all the time. "What do you father is planning to do, uncle?" asked Raymond, but his eyes were still on Edward. "When you, his son, don't know, do you think I will?" retorted Stannis as he turned to look at his nephew. He knew a lot about his nephew's capabilities, And he was probably the only one that believed that Raymond was much smarter than Edward when he was at this age. He was also one of Raymond's supporters. He believed that Raymond would do much more than Edward did because Raymond was brilliant in his eyes. 1. Chapter 199, starting. The two could only guess while Edward handled the sacrifice. When everything was in its place, Edward gave the signal to Brown, who stood by the side. After seeing his king's hand, he turned to the cart behind him and put his hands, taking out 2 eggs. Yet, they were exactly the dragon eggs that Edward would hatch. One was deep black while the other was close to silver. Mace Flip took the 2 eggs from Brown and hurried up to place them on top of the altar before returning back to his place. When Edward saw that everything was ready, he ordered Flip to start the fire. "Start," said Edward as he looked at Flip, who hurried to do his job with the rest of his men. Before the group behind realizing what Edward meant, the soldiers lit up sticks before starting a fire in a certain place in the altar. "What?" shouted the group at the same time when they heard the wails of more than 20,000 men at the same time. This mountain's name would change after this sacrifice to be the Mountain of the Burned. Anyway, the fire did not take much time before it reached high up in the sky. Among all the wails and the heat, Edward took off his sword, crown, and coat, handing them over to Flip before moving forward in the fire's direction. No one paid attention to Edward at this time since they already had enough with the loud wails and the heat. Only one little girl looked at Edward with tears in her eyes. She continued to shout, but her shouts got lost in all this noise. She managed to attract Raymond's attention to her father when she made a fuss and tried pulling her hand and forced him to look at her. "What is it, little James?" asked Raymond with a loud voice to get heard when he saw that Jasmine could not stay still. "Look!" shouted Jasmine while her tears did not stop. At this moment, Raymond finally noticed that his father got very close to the fire and did not stop and was shocked. Not only him, but everyone present finally noticed that the king was moving towards the fire. Edward did not explain before about anything and only did the test secretly with a very hot kettle. Edward wanted to make sure that everything would go smoothly before allowing his children to risk their lives. Edward's children were about to follow him, but Raymond, who remembered his father's words clearly, stood in their way and prevented them from keeping up. "Don't move. Father knows what he is doing," shouted Raymond with a cold tone, stopping everyone in his traces. He could only pray in his heart that his father would come out without injury. Raymond did not know that his dream of becoming the king helped him in saying those words. The group watched as their father was about to enter the fire with heavy hearts. They did not know why their father insisted on risking his life like that without giving them a good reason for why he was doing that. What would they do if he died in this place? As for Daenerys, who did the same thing in the original timeline and entered the fire on her own, she thought that Edward was crazy and started getting mad for doing something like that and wanted to stop as well. In the original timeline, she discovered that she would not get burned after she married Drogo and went with his horde. Daenerys found by accident, though, when her idiotic brother was attacking her as he always did. Her relationship with Viserys deteriorated since that time because she thought that he was not a true dragon. As for why she wanted to stop Edward, Edward had treated her kindly and took her as his daughter. He cared about her as if he was her real father. She did not get the chance to experience such care and feelings since her brother changed and started treating her like a tool in order to get his army instead. Edward was not like what his children thought. He was not the invincible Iron Man that did not fear a shit. Actually, Edward was dying of worry and fear in every step towards the fire. Even if he tested his fire resistance when he put his hands in the fire, he was still afraid to die in the end. Then why was Edward still insisting on doing all this? Well, the answer is pretty clear at this point. Edward knew if he did not hatch the dragons and have them as a force to fight his enemies, he would have it hard fighting the Night King and might come up to see his children die as well. He could not send his children to do his job. Edward was the father and was the one that should protect them, not the opposite. As for Stannis, Edward grew to like Stannis during all those years since he was the only member of his original family who was still alive or Edward did not kill or wanted dead. Plus, Edward had already gone through a lot to reach this moment. During the blood rituals, he already thought that he would die for sure and had made his preparations for that moment during that year. He did not want everything that he did to go waste when Edward was finally about to achieve one of his goals, not to mention that riding a dragon was something incredible, and he would like to see it coming. Anyway, Edward, who was about to go through the fire, stopped at the last moment. Since he was not quite sure if he would live to see his children again after going through this event, He wanted to look at them for what it might be last time. When he turned his head and saw his children's expressions and the sadness in their eyes, he could not help but smile, although his heart hurt him a lot for his little Jasmine after seeing her look like that. Jasmine was crying and shouting hard, trying to get out of Raymond's grip, but Raymond, who listened to his father's words and knew how dangerous the situation was, did not allow her to follow Edward. As for Teresa, she had some tears building in her eyes, but she held them up well without letting them go on her cheek. Yet, she was afraid that her father might die, but that did not mean that she should look weak if something like that happened. The boys were the ones that made Edward proud. Although they did not look well, they stood there like dragons, ready to stand against the mountains. Chapter 200, Binding with Two Dragons and Raymond's Plans. Edward smiled because he knew that if something happened to him, he would know that his children could stand their ground against the world if they needed to do that. After taking the final look and sighing in relief, Edward entered the fire with his own legs after taking a very long breath. When Edward put his hands in the fire the last time, he did not feel the heat or got burned by it, but this time was different. It seemed that the existence of the dragon eggs that would hatch a fire-breathing dragons and the sacrifice needed for that multiplied the fire and heat by thousands of times. Edward could swear that he saw the rocks melting on the ground, and he walked on them like that. Although the fire was much more frightening than the other fires he had ever seen, Edward sighed in relief after seeing that his skin was still fine after getting exposed to a rock-melting fire. The problem he saw was the heat in this place that reached a high degree. Although the blood and water in his body got protected by his skin or the rituals, once they left his body, they would evaporate instantly. Not only that, but any effort in this place made him sweat like hell, and his body might get dried up before he could even hatch the dragons if the situation continued on like that. Edward could not see his way in this place because of the fire and smoke that filled the air. Since he had to exert as little effort as possible to guarantee that he would live, Edward closed his eyes and depended on his memory to make his way to the eggs. And his memories did not betray him at this moment, and he managed to reach the two eggs location with ease. The smoke and fire did not make him see clearly anything, but he could still hear the wail of the sacrifices even at the center of this altar, but he did not care about those people. To complete the binding, Edward must offer his blood to the two eggs. But when Edward cut himself to do the job, he did not know that his blood would evaporate like his sweat in this climate. Edward had to cut himself deep enough to solve this problem, and the fire helped him close his wound. Seeing that his blood got absorbed by the eggs, Edward had to admit that he got surprised to see that the two eggs did that. Edward did not expect that because he read about this little thing in a book. He remembered that everyone could only bind with one dragon, so how could he do that? Edward's head was spinning since he was brainstorming himself to find a solution to this situation. What Edward read was a book that he found in the Citadel. The book got translated from the old Valyria Freehold's language, and he could only make an assumption about this situation. Edward could only guess at this point, and his guess was that Valyria's dragon lords did not know that this could happen, or they would have tried doing that. At that time, the dragons were a lot, but the number of riders was not enough. Not to mention that the strength of a house got determined by the number of dragons and riders they had. Edward could only think of only one thing that was much older than Valyria Freehold, and that was the blood rituals he performed. Those rituals were ancient enough that Edward traced them to 10 or 20,000 or something years to the Empire of Dawn that perished long ago. Although what he performed was a simplified version of the original one, they should carry many effects. So Edward could only think that this was the doing of those rituals. To decrease the amount of water that he would lose, Edward decided to spend the rest of the time required for the egg hatching sitting beside them. He would wait with his eyes closed like this. Edward just hoped that everything would move smoothly without any problem. He estimated that he could wait like that without food or water for 4 days at most, so he hoped that the eggs would hatch before that. As for the group outside, they were dying from worry. They did not know how Edward was doing there. But they held some hope since they did not hear his screams after he got inside that inferno. Although they had thought of getting close to the fire and trying to check if it would hurt them, they did not try that, though. It was an instinctive fear of fire that reached that high in the sky. The morning 3 days later, the group did not hear a word from Edward since he entered. And every day, they would wait for him like that in front of the fire. They did not know if he was alive, and since they were afraid to get close to the fire, they could only wait for it to die out before exploring its ruins. The problem was that the fire did not even stop for a second and continued to increase in scale in the past 2 days, which disappointed the group and made them think that they were useless and they wasted their father's teachings. As for Raymond, He acted as the Storm King in the past 2 days. He was the one that could order everyone in that place. When he saw that his father might have died in there, he ordered the soldiers to be ready to move out. Although he was worried about Edward, Raymond knew if something happened to his father, their position would be in danger, and they would have to enter an endless fight to stabilize the kingdom. Their father was the one that united all this empire that covered all these vast lands. Plus, to do all this, their father killed countless people and had many enemies here and there that might want revenge. Raymond knew that once his father passed away, rebellions would arise everywhere, and he would have to take action himself. His uncle, Stannis, who was observing him all along, nodded his head when he saw that Raymond did not waste any time. But Raymond, who thought about all those problems and knew what might happen if his father died, had taken some measures long ago without Edward's knowledge. Raymond had men of his own in every little house or city under their control that would take action the moment Raymond told them to do that. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.